Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. I'm back after a 2-day absence. Welcome to this Robservations episode number 282. I am, of course, the master of fun and wonder, the viceroy of verisimilitude, the existential Mr. Rogers, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I'm very happy to be back with you, the Post-Geek Singularity, you imagination connoisseurs that make up what is, let's face it, the greatest fan channel on the web, at least in terms of audience. I'm not saying that like I'm the greatest YouTube fan host on the web, but you are the best audience for any YouTube channel, at least dealing with the genre pundit space. I know that from the bottom of my heart. And you know what? I've had nothing to do with that. Give it up for yourselves. Golf clap for all of you. Thank you very much. As always, these chats are brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And as you all know, if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity when you check out, and you get 20% off your order. Also, we are running through Christmas every week. We're giving away a bottle of Lucky Tiger body wash, that head to tail body wash. There is a new winner. I am unaware of who that winner is, though. I will announce that on tomorrow's show. It's very exciting. We'll be giving away one bottle a week. You know, one day I want to give away like a PlayStation 4 or a Blu-ray player with my 10 favorite movies. Maybe I can find a sponsor who will do that for me. The holidays are coming up. But until now, all I can give you is Lucky Tiger men's grooming products, and of course myself and my ongoing commentary. And boy, do I have a lot to say. Yesterday I made, I would say, a mistake wading into the ongoing hashtag release the Snyder Cut controversy. And if you mention that on Twitter, you get swarmed by all kinds of people. Some people I knew, some people I didn't know, but a lot of people have many strong opinions about the Snyder Cut, and I want to get into that because I have a lot to say. And there's been a lot of information that's dropped over the last 2 days about it in the press, which I thought was interesting. But before I get to that, there's an article that I really want to read that I'd like to address, that it was originally posted on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. I later found it and I tweeted it, and it's about music, but I felt that it speaks to something much larger. And I'd like to read it to you all now. And the article is entitled, "The Devaluation of Music. It's Worse Than You Think. Starving artists have been affected by more than just piracy and streaming royalties." And when I read that, starving artists, I was thinking filmmakers as well, especially, well, low-budget filmmakers like myself. This article was posted on October 11th. It's by Craig Havinghurst, and I wanted to read it because I've been thinking a lot about it, and it kind of gets into the larger issues I want to discuss in regards to the Snyder Cut. Craig goes on to say, "In their many justified laments about the trajectory of their profession in the digital age, songwriters and musicians regularly assert that music has been devalued. Over the years, they've pointed at two outstanding culprits. First, it was music piracy and the futility of competing with free. More recently, the focus has been on the seemingly minuscule payments songs generate when they're streamed on services such as Spotify or Apple Music. These are serious issues, and many agree that the industry and lawmakers have a lot of work to do. But at least there is a dialogue and progress being made toward new models for rights and royalties in the new music economy. Less obvious are a number of other forces and trends that have devalued music in a more pernicious way than the problems of hypersupply and inter-industry jockeying. And by music, I don't mean the popular song formats that one sees on award shows and hears on commercial radio. I mean music, the sonic art form. Imaginative, conceptual composition and improvisation rooted in harmonic and rhythmic ideas. In other words, music as it was defined and regarded 4 or 5 decades ago, when art music incompletely but generally called classical and jazz, had a seat at the table. When I hear songwriters of radio hits decry their tiny checks from Spotify, I think of today's jazz prodigies who won't have a shot at even a fraction of the old guard's popular success. They can't even imagine working in a music environment that might lead them to household name status of the Miles Davis or John Coltrane variety. They are struggling against forces at the very nexus of commerce, culture, and education that have conspired to make music less meaningful to the public at large. Plug in movies to there, especially independent film. Here are some of the most problematic issues musicians are facing in the industry's current landscape. 1, the death of context. Digital music ecosystems, starting with Apple's iTunes, reduced recordings down to a stamp-sized cover image and 3 data points: artist, song title, album. As classical music commentators have long argued, these systems do a poor job with composers, conductors, soloists, and ensembles. Plus, as I argued at length in a prior essay, they're devoid of context. While there are capsule biographies of artists and composers in most of the services, historic albums are sold and streamed without the credits or liner notes of the LP or the CD era. The constituency of superfans who read and assimilate this stuff is too small to merit attention from the digital services or labels. But what's lost is the maven class that infuses the culture with informed enthusiasm. Our information poor environment of digital is failing to inspire such fandom, and that's profoundly harmful to our shared idea about the value of music or movies. 2, commercial radio. It's an easy target, but one can't overstate how profoundly radio changed between the explosion of popular music in the mid-20th century and the corporate model of the last 30 years. An ethos of musicality and discovery has been replaced wholesale by a cynical manipulation of demographics and the blandest common denominator. Playlists are much shorter, with a handful of singles repeated incessantly until focus groups say quit. DJs no longer choose music based on their expertise and no longer weave a narrative around the records. As with liner notes, this makes for more passive listening and shrinks the musical diet of most Americans down to a handful of heavily produced industrial-scale hits. 3, the media. In the late 1960s, when I was born, mainstream print publication took the arts seriously, covering and promoting exceptional contemporary talents across all styles of music. Thus did Thelonious Monk wind up on the cover of Time magazine, for example. When I began covering music for a chain newspaper around 2000, stories were prioritized by the prior name recognition of the subject. Art discovery stories were subordinate to celebrity news at a systemic level. Industry metrics, chart position, and concert ticket sales became a staple of music news. In the age of measured clicks, the always-on focus grouping has institutionalized the echo chamber of pop music, stultifying and discouraging meaningful engagement with art music. 4, conflation. A little noticed but corrosive quirk of the digital age is the way our interfaces conflate music with all other media and entertainment choices. iTunes started it by taking software ostensibly for collecting and playing music and morphing it into a platform for TV, film, podcasts, games, apps, and so on. This is both a symbol and a cause of the dwindling meaning and import of music in the multimedia onslaught that is our culture. The shiny displays distracting people away from just music are already ubiquitous. So why impose them on a music player? I believe that one reason vinyl and phonographs are hot again is that musically oriented people crave something of a shrine for their music, a device that is for music only. 5, anti-intellectualism. Music has for decades been promoted and explained to us almost exclusively as a talisman of emotion. The overwhelming issue is how it makes you feel. Whereas the art music of the West transcended because of its dazzling dance of emotion and intellect, Art music relates to mathematics, architecture, symbolism, and philosophy. And as such, topics have been belittled in the general press or cable television. Our collective ability to relate to music through a humanities lens has atrophied. Those of us who had music explained and demonstrated to us as a game for the brain as well as the heart had it really lucky. Why so many are satisfied to engage with music at only the level of feeling is a vast, impoverished mystery. Movies and games. We as a culture do hear quite a lot of classical or imposed instrumental music, but it is migrated from the concert hall to the video game and movie score. On one hand, that's given young composers options to make a living, and some very good music is being imagined for these imaginary landscapes. But there's a pernicious effect of the ubiquitous media soundtrack in that whole galaxies of musical ideas and motifs and moods have been essentially occupied and rendered cliche. How does a young person steeped in the faux Shostakovich rumbling of a war game soundtrack hear real Shostakovich and think it's any big deal? This is rarely remarked on, but I believe that thousands of cumulative impressions of background music assigned to romance and grief and heroism have laid down layers of scar tissue on our ability to feel something when tonal symphonic music is made or written in the 21st century. 7. Music in schools. It all begins or ends here. Like any other language, the rules and terms and structure are most readily absorbed by the young. And as music's been cut for more than half the grade schools in the US in a long, grinding trend, the pushback has been based increasingly on evidence about music education's ripple effects on overall academic performance. The music makes kids smarter argument. This is true and vital, but we tend to lose sight of the case for the value of music in our culture. That music education makes kids more musical. Those who internalize music's rules and rights in early life will be more likely to attend serious concerts and bring more astute ears to their pop music choices as adults. Those who care about the future of the music business ought to spend less time complaining about digital disruptions and expend more energy lifting up the public's awareness of serious music. Because we truly do devalue music when we reduce our most impactful art form to an artifact of celebrity and lifestyle choice. Complex instrumental music has become marginalized to within an inch of its very existence. And that has a lot to do with industry folk defining value in the only way that affects their mailbox money. Again, I found this article on Medium, and it's by Craig Havinghurst. And the reason I wanted to read this article is this absolutely addresses what the commentary we've been listening to from various filmmakers, whether it's Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese, and I've talked about that on this show a lot. And even though this is about music, I think the same is true of movies. And there are two things that have been going on that just over the weekend that I wanted to add into this. And one of them is, even though I've been broadcasting, I've been on YouTube, first on AMC Heroes, then on Collider Heroes, then on the John Campea show, and now I'm here on my own show, on Robservations. I never really considered myself a YouTuber, but now I guess I have to, especially after 282 episodes of this show. But one of the things that being a YouTuber has done is it's made me look at a lot of other YouTube channels, and I have found that there is a lot of material that I love. Now, yes, I watch a lot of toy channels like Analog Toys or the Dave or Justin's Collection. I watch a lot of media channels, whether it's the Dave Cullen Show. Of course, I watch the Fandom Menace stuff. I really like the Popcast doing some great videos. But one of my favorite YouTubers is a guy named Davey504. He's an Italian who makes videos about basically his love of the bass, the guitar, the bass. And he discovered playing the bass approximately 6 years ago when he heard Strutter, Kiss's Strutter, being played in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. And at first, he went to play Guitar Hero, but it wasn't available. And then he took up the bass for real. And now he's become, well, from what I can see, a virtuoso bass player. But he also has made a channel that is hilariously funny, full of personality, and you never know what he's going to do. And he's certainly created a character. The guy's approaching 5 million subs. But what he's really doing, aside from all of the entertainment value, is he's bringing his love of a very specific kind of music, an instrument. You can't watch any of his videos and not find him endearing and want to pick up a bass guitar and start playing. And I find that kind of a channel on YouTube is new entertainment. You'd never be able to have that entertainment 10 years ago. It's definitely a result of what YouTube is bringing the masses. So all of these new forms of entertainment are creating new paradigms that are very, very exciting. But at the same time, we're also losing, we're losing, I think, the foundations of understanding why things are great. And I really think this article did a good job of explaining that. You know, Elizabeth and I were watching Booksmart, which came out this year, that Olivia Wilde directed. And Booksmart is a wonderful movie. It did really well on the festival circuit, and it was released to theaters, and it really didn't do very well. It certainly didn't do as well as people thought. And I have to tell you, aside from all of it's a story about two teenage girls, but really it's a story about friendship, and it's a story about a bond between two people. And what I love about that film is it starts out being one way, and in the first act, there's a twist. I mean, it's not a I am your father kind of a twist, but it's a twist. And it really, it turns the movie and shakes it up and makes it something that it doesn't start out to initially feel like it is. And I think that twist is a very valuable lesson to learn. And I looked at this film and I'm like, this film should have made a lot more money than it did. And I hope that now that it's available on Hulu and it's available on other streaming services and media, that other people will discover it, and not just teenage girls. It's really a film for everyone. I thought it was a wonderful film. Really, I love the way it was directed, and the central performances. Beanie Feldstein is, of course, the lead actress, and then I forget her name, but the girl we saw, she was just in another Netflix show. The two of them, great lead performances. All the supporting cast is great, and for whatever reason, nobody went and saw it. And maybe it's because they're waiting. I mean, now we have there's sort of a whole strata of movies that people find that they can wait for on streaming. And I can't deny that, but I do think it's a wonderful film, and check it out. Anyway, I just think that the foundational underpinnings of all of our popular media are something that we all, if you love cinema, it's important to explore all kinds of cinema. And I think that that's what Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola and everyone else was talking about. Now, that brings me to hashtag release the Snyder Cut. For those of you who don't know, for those of you who might not know what any of this is all about, we all know that Justice League, which came out in 2017, was a film that was directed by Zack Snyder. It was really going to be the third in his, what I like to call, his Man of Steel trilogy. Now, for those who might not be as aware as most of the Post-Geek Singularity is, Zack Snyder is a filmmaker that came out of making music videos and commercials, and he really came upon the scene making a remake of George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, written by James Gunn. Now, I've said on the show before, Dawn of the Dead's one of my favorite, not just favorite horror movies, but one of my favorite movies of all time. The original, George Romero's original Dawn of the Dead, which, by the way, I know it was playing in certain places in 1978, but is celebrating, or already celebrated, its 40th anniversary this year. And the UK's second sight is making new 4K transfers of the 3 different versions of the film. They're also doing Romero's Martin. It's my most eagerly awaited physical release of 2020. I can't wait to get my hands on it. When they were going to remake this movie, I was furious. It made me angry. I'm like, who are you? You know, how many of George Romero's movies are going to get remade? Surprisingly, the ones that have been remade, Dawn of the Dead, well, and The Crazies, Night of the Living Dead was obviously already remade, but more recent, Dawn of the Dead and The Crazies are actually, I hate to say it, they're terrific movies. Well, I don't hate to say it, but I was very excited when I saw Dawn of the Dead. I was like, this guy, Zack Snyder, along with James Gunn's script, knocked it out of the park. Now, along with other movies Zack Snyder went on to make, Dawn of the Dead has 2 different edits. There is a director's cut, and there's the theatrical release version of the film. Pretty cool. Now, Zack Snyder famously went on to, of course, make 300, and then he made Watchmen, which is one of my favorite graphic novels of all time. Again, I was against him remaking it, but after what he did with 300, which is a very faithful adaptation of Frank Miller's graphic novel that was a story of the Spartans that took on the Persian army, did very well. Pretty much a great visionary film. And I enjoyed 300. And Watchmen, well, I'm not going to get into what I think about Watchmen because I'm going to talk about that later when I want to do a whole show on Watchmen when it's over, the new HBO series. But there are 3 different cuts of Watchmen. And this is important. There's the theatrical version, there's the director's cut, and then there's the ultimate edition of Watchmen. So Zack Snyder for Warner Brothers did 3 different cuts of Watchmen. He also made things like Sucker Punch. And then, of course, he joined the beginnings of the DCEU, making Man of Steel. Then he went on to direct Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. And finally, he went on to make Justice League. Now, the DCEU they were looking at Marvel's great success that they were having with the MCU, and they wanted to emulate that success. And Zack Snyder was given the reins along with Christopher Nolan to sort of oversee. Nolan, of course, made his Batman trilogy, that the last 2 films were incredibly successful, and the first movie was seen as a tremendous reboot, I guess you could call it a reboot, since Batman and Robin. Then we had Batman Begins, Nolan's Batman Begins, which I thought was a terrific film. So Christopher Nolan oversaw, and then Zack Snyder and his wife they produced, and Snyder directed Man of Steel, a movie that I must say that I have been a staunch defender of, a movie that I really loved. And a lot of people, I've been catching hell for that since it came out. I would talk about how much I love Man of Steel on Collider Heroes and on the John Campea show, and many people always come back at me and say, well, they don't like it as much as, say, other incarnations of Superman. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is a film that was incredibly expensive. I have heard that production and marketing costs might have exceeded $450 million. I've not seen a spreadsheet. I cannot confirm that. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice made almost $900 million worldwide. But it was a movie that everyone was expecting to go over $1 billion. And ultimately, it was considered a disappointment. It was a critical disappointment, and fanboys, the fan community, did not embrace Batman v Superman. As a matter of fact, ask anybody who collects comics or likes superhero movies, just say the name Martha to anyone. They'll throw something right back to you. So it's not like Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice was considered a resounding hit that fanboys the world over and fangirls, fan people, imagination connoisseurs did not embrace did not embrace Batman v Superman with open arms. Now, I will say this. I don't think Batman v Superman is a particularly great film. However, I think there's really great things in it. Whatever you think of Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, his vision for Superman and Batman v Superman, and then the film he made after that, Justice League, which is where we're coming to, have a very interesting quality to them. There is a painterly quality, and clearly Zack Snyder takes a lot of his inspiration from comic books, from graphic novels. I don't know if he was the best person to adapt Watchmen. I think his movie version of Watchmen is a recreation of the comic rather than an adaptation, which I think is sort of strange since Watchmen, the comic, is in fact a meta commentary on comic books in general and the idea of four-color superheroes. But even Batman v Superman has an ultimate cut, which I think is a far superior version of Batman v Superman than what was released theatrically. The problem is, as we all know, when you're going to release a movie theatrically, everyone's worried about running time because you have to get a certain amount of shows in per day in order to keep the box office at a certain level. Longer movies, there's less show times in the day, which means less money. And conventional wisdom is these kinds of movies need to be shorter. The shorter, the better. However, I don't hold to that conventional wisdom. I think that we've seen with the extended versions of movies like Lord of the Rings, the version of Watchmen, the ultimate cut, well, maybe not necessarily the ultimate cut, but at least the director's cut, are better versions of these films. Would they play better theatrically? I don't know. I've seen the extended cuts of the Lord of the Rings films in the theaters with audiences, and I think they play like gangbusters. But Zack Snyder, whether or not you like what he does as a filmmaker, he clearly shoots, he's trying to make epic films. Now, when Batman v Superman came out, it's very dour. There's not a lot of humor. It's not the bright, airy movie that you'd see if it was coming from, say, Marvel. But there is a grandeur to his vision of superheroes, whether it's in Man of Steel, whether it's in Batman v Superman, and yes, some of Justice League. A grandeur and the scope that is very different from any other superhero movie that's ever been made. The only thing that I ever equate it to, and this might seem a little strange, is Alex Proyas's first The Crow, because it's a very stylized, very sort of the way Alex Proyas used model shots, and it's just very stylized. And I like the stylization as a lifelong DC Comics fanboy. I like Zack Snyder's stylization. I just think that there's a lot in his storytelling that leaves. That was Elizabeth, everyone. She could have at least waved and said hello, but she doesn't even do that. Oh, that's great. She says hi. But there's the stylization of it is unique. And I have to say that the extended version, the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, yes, there's a lot of goofy stuff in there still. I don't like the fact that Gotham and Metropolis are across the water from each other. I don't know the Bay. I don't know why Superman, Clark Kent, has never ventured over, at least as Superman, and checked out Gotham. If only, like, what, he just can't make his way across the water. There's a lot of stuff in Batman v Superman that I think is odd from a number of standpoints. But the ultimate cut of the movie casts a spell. It's undoubtedly something that is visually interesting that I can appreciate because it is distinctly Zack Snyder's vision. So I have to say, I was very excited when he was going to make the Justice League. I've wanted to see a Justice League movie my whole life. The Justice League of America was my first comic that I started following in the early 100 issues. As I've told people before, my mom, when I was a kid, would go to the spindle racks and buy me the new issue of Justice League. She'd find it for me and bring it home. I remember reading Justice League, I think it's 114, which is the first time I encountered a team up. They reprinted the old, Gardner Fox stories of the evil Earth 1 and Earth 2. My favorite thing in the world was Justice League and Justice Society teaming up. So the idea that a Justice League movie was getting made, and remember, Ben Affleck being cast as Batman, go back and look at the vitriol, the fanboy outrage when he was cast. The same fanboy outrage that we had to deal with when Michael Keaton was cast 30 years ago, or when Heath Ledger was cast as Joker. Fanboy outrage is something I've seen my whole life. Hell, I was pissed off as a kid when Star Trek fans got the very first space shuttle named Enterprise because I knew it was never actually going into space. I was mad, although fans were able. Look, I'm part of the Star Trek community. If it wasn't for fans writing letters, there would be no third season of Star Trek. I am very aware of the collective power of fandom, and never has it been more powerful since we have had social media. Well, I'm not going to get into it totally. When Justice League was being made, it had already started production. Batman v Superman came out, and it was very quickly apparent that it was going to disappoint on a number of levels. Critically, the fan community did not embrace it. So, Warner Brothers balked. And let me tell you something. I began my Hollywood career working at Warner Brothers. I worked on one movie in the art department as a little peon assistant, and then I was hired at Warner Brothers as another little peon assistant. But I was hired into a specific department. I was a management trainee brought in by Bill Young, the senior vice president of physical production at Warner Brothers. My office, I had an office at Warner Brothers, was in the executive wing, the exclusive hallowed halls of all the studio execs at Warner Brothers. Now, admittedly, it was 2 stories. We were on the bottom story, along with certain other senior vice presidents. And upstairs were all the very powerful people like Mark Canton, like Bruce Berman, like Terry Semel, and Bob Daly. Those are the guys basically running the studio and deciding what movies that were going to be made. But I was in and out of their offices all day, every day. And one of the things that I had learned to do when I was growing up working in retail and home video and things was I could talk to adults without being an annoying fanboy. So I got to just wander around the Warner Brothers lot and pretty much talk to anybody I wanted to about anything I wanted to when it came to movies. And in our department, I saw a lot of stuff, including the entire making of Bonfire of the Vanities. So I saw a lot about how movies are made. I loved hanging out in Fred Talmadge's post-production department, learning how films are edited, films are put together at the studio level. It was pretty interesting when I was at Warner Brothers. So even though I was young, I was in my early 20s, I was getting an education at Warner Brothers because I was at the highest level of the studio, basically with my eyes and ears open. So I learned a lot about how movies are made at the studio level. I could have stayed on that track, probably wound up as an executive for a number of years and then got a producing deal. By the way, when I was there, one of the people that always gave me the time of day, who always spoke to me, who never blew me off, was Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who is now a big producer in his own right. He was brought in, he started working when I was there, and he was a great guy. He even helped me a little bit on Free Enterprise 20 years ago. So not all of the studio executives who work in Hollywood are bad people. There's a lot of very smart, very learned people in the studio system. Anyway, when Batman v Superman did not do what they wanted it to do, and by the way, there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the studio, that conventional wisdom kicked in, and Batman v Superman was edited. They were like, we are not going to release a 3-hour Batman v Superman movie. They weren't going to do it. So the movie had to be cut. Now, I saw this when I was in the aughts. I was documenting. I worked on long-term DVD projects. As many people know, I was in New Zealand for many months working on the Lord of the Rings films. Then I was in New Zealand for 14 months working on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Then I jumped over and worked on Superman Returns for a year. So I know what it's like to be in a theater and you see a movie that you think is finished. Superman Returns. And then based on input from a lot of young people, by the way, who didn't understand what wrecked Krypton was, the movie was reworked and they cut a half an hour out of it. And the theatrical version of Superman Returns, the only version of Superman Returns, I think is inferior to the version that was made originally. But I understand the studio has great concerns. And ultimately, Superman Returns, I think, suffered the same fate as Batman v Superman. That these are movies that don't necessarily conform to what studio executives might think they're supposed to be. So Batman v Superman was a movie that a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions about. But what happened during that time is we also saw the great success of, say, Avengers. Warner Brothers is looking like, my God, Avengers made $1.5 billion. The numbers that the MCU movies are starting to make, the fact that Avengers existed, but that it became one of the most successful movies ever made, is something that wasn't lost on Warner Brothers. And they hoped that Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, was going to do that kind of money. In fact, that's exactly what the expectation was at the studio. But then they second-guessed themselves because you've got different cooks. You've got Christopher Nolan on one end. You've got Zack Snyder and his wife on another end. Then you've got the studio on the other end. Everybody's trying to second-guess each other. Well, let me tell you something. No one has ever become successful in Hollywood or had a smash hit by being reactionary, by looking at what other people are doing over at other studios and thinking that, they're panicking and they decide they have to emulate what the other guy's doing. You will never win doing that. You will never have success doing that. You know how you have success? You have success by rolling the dice, by betting, by doubling down on what it is you set out to do in the first place. So when they made Batman v Superman and it came out and it became apparent it was not the success that they had hoped for, even though it was very successful, it was also very, very expensive. There was thinking that Zack Snyder's approach to this material, because after all, the studio's not going to blame anyone in their own group. They're going to blame the filmmaker, even though the filmmaker has to adhere to what the studio wants. And I think that the version, the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman that's on video is a much better cut. And I think if they released that in the theaters, it might have had better critical reception and the fans would have liked it. Now, that doesn't mean liked it more. That doesn't mean there isn't stupid stuff in it, because there is stupid stuff in it. But long story short, the studio balked, and Zack Snyder himself and his family had a personal, horrible tragedy and a setback. But for a number of different reasons, the studio decided, we need to make Justice League, which is a continuation of Zack Snyder's vision that he began in Man of Steel, brought over to Batman v Superman, and was going to continue on with Justice League. As a matter of fact, it was basically, I've always called it the Man of Steel trilogy, even though Batman v Superman is more Batman's movie. But in my own mind, that's how I thought about it. So, Zack Snyder left Justice League of America, the Justice League movie. And Joss Whedon, who directed the Avengers, fan favorite Joss Whedon, was brought in to finish the film. Now, it has been reported that he rewrote up to 80 pages of script. Whole characters, such as Iris West, Wally West's girlfriend, was removed from the film. And they decided to change the tone, make it more lighthearted and fun, like an MCU movie is. Also, at the time when they were doing these changes, Henry Cavill was famously making Mission Impossible Fallout and was no longer available, or not available, to at least come in and shave his mustache. So they had to do reshoots, extensive reshoots, and remove his mustache. Long story short, the Justice League movie that was made was a very different animal than what Zack Snyder was making. And over the last 2 years, it's became known that there is what is being called amongst fan circles. All you have to do is hashtag release the Snyder Cut on Twitter and you'll find out. But the fan community upset with the movie that Look, I wanted to see a Justice League movie my whole life. The final Justice League film that was released, in my mind, was a complete and utter failure. The cast is great. The storyline makes no sense. It's all over the place. It is lackluster, and it smacks the same way that Suicide Squad smacks of studio interference, of too many cooks, and it really is. Let's just say it's an unsatisfying movie. I would dare say it's a bad movie. It's a movie that, say, upwards cost $300 million, and it made just over $600 million. It was not a very successful film. A huge disappointment. But to me, it's a huge disappointment because that Zack Snyder, for a number of reasons, did not finish the movie that he made. It was the studio balking, and the studio did not allow, and then, of course, Zack Snyder had to leave because of a great tragedy in his family, but they decided to retool the movie midstream, even further along than even midstream. The movie was done with production. Anyway, a lot of fans, and let's face it, fans are doing a lot of good. The collective voice of fandom can do a lot of great things, such as recently changing the look of Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't know how much of a triumph that is. I haven't seen the movie, but okay. Fan outcry can work. And there's been a lot of various versions of movies, such as the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. People always hold that up to be something that is the same thing as the Zack Snyder situation. It's not, but they do anyway. And there's been multiple director's cuts of many movies. There's the director's cut of The Abyss. There's the director's cut of the director's edition of Star Trek The Motion Picture. For the most part, though, director's cuts are made and involving the original filmmakers who did not leave the project for whatever reason. See, here's the thing. The difference with Justice League is that Warner Brothers made a significant change midstream, and they retooled their movie. They spent a lot of money, and it didn't work. It didn't work. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. When I see, and I was trying to talk about this on Twitter, but rather than, I think, a lot of people, when you start talking about release of Snyder Cut, you get attacked by people that don't know you. There's a lot of people that clearly don't know who I am. And, they're asking me what I know. What do I know? Well, I know a lot about post-production, considering I'll just use as an example the movie that you've heard me talk ad infinitum about that I'm working on now, Tango Shalom. Small, independent movie. Well, along with the Burnett axiom, I have a Burnett rule about post-production that I always bring in when when people making low-budget movies always talk to me about post. The first thing I always say to them is 33% of your budget must be allocated for post-production. And they always push back. I hear it. I've heard it for 25 years since I started editing low-budget films. Oh, no, 33%, that's too much. I'm like, that's fine. You can say that now. But I'm telling you, you've got to have 33% of your budget put aside for post-production, because if you don't, we can't finish the movie. I'll cut your movie for you. I'll even post-supervise it. But you're not going to have enough money to make the film. As an example, Tango Shalom, we screened it 14 months ago. Screened it, had a screening. I did a 5.1 temp stereo mix. Wasn't the final mix. We screened it. There was a cut. The cut was done. Sort of. We knew we were going to refine the cut, but you can watch it. The movie itself, however, not done. Hadn't been color timed. Didn't have visual effects. All the visual effects in it were temp. Certainly didn't have a sound mix. Didn't have a score. So when you say you have a cut of the film in industry parlance, you are saying that, yeah, we have a cut of the movie. There's a cut of movie that exists. You can watch it. Now, on Tango Shalom, and with every other movie I've ever worked on as an editor, and all the movies that I've ever worked on as a documentarian, whether it's X-Men 2, whether it's Superman Returns, Chronicles of Narnia, Michael Davis's Shoot 'Em Up, movies that I was documenting from the get-go, you watch cuts of the movie. They're done. You can watch them. The cuts are done, but they're not finished films. long way from being finished films. And so now, because Zack Snyder has said, and many people involved with the film have said, there's a cut of Batman v Superman that's done, that's finished. I believe that. I believe there's a cut of Batman v Justice League that you can watch. I believe that you can watch. I believe there's many cuts. Zack Snyder himself on a YouTube clip says there are many cuts of Justice League you can watch. Now, after the debacle that was Justice League, many fans, myself included, by the way, who were very disappointed, would love the opportunity to see what Zack Snyder had originally shot and conceived of when he was making Justice League. Now, there's an article that dropped today at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on CNBC on their website today. Release the Snyder Cut. Why Warner Brothers won't give Justice League superfans what they want. This article is by Jacob Douglas and Sarah Whitten. In 2017, Warner Brothers released its big DC Comics superhero team-up movie, Justice League, to battle Disney, Marvel Studios' Avengers franchise. It lost. Justice League was released to harsh critical reviews, 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, and while it earned $658 million worldwide, that was on a $300 million budget, with the domestic gross only reaching $230 million. Justice League still has a grip on a portion of the DC fan base, but that doesn't mean Warner Brothers will release Snyder's version of the film. The release film, a kind of Frankenstein's monster of a movie, was co-written and co-directed by Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon, although the pair didn't work on the film together. Whedon was brought on board after executives balked at Snyder's initial cut of the film. I don't necessarily know if that's true, but that's what the article says. Warner Brothers wanted Justice League to have more humor, like the films from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and who better to handle that than Whedon, who directed 2 Marvel films. Snyder ultimately ended up leaving the project due to the death of his daughter. Snyder's initial cut was 214 minutes long and contained dozens of scenes that fleshed out characters' backstories, developed the mythos of the world in which Justice League was set, and teased upcoming films. While the main plot of the film remained, much of Snyder's secondary plot was cut in Whedon's rewrites in an effort to streamline the film. I don't know about you, but when I hear that there's a 214-minute version of Justice League, I am like, sign me up. Do I want to see that shit? Hell yes, I do. But 214 minutes, that's a long movie. That's a very long movie. Now, keep in mind the 33% number I cited about Post. Because Whedon's version altered so much of Snyder's vision, fans have clamored to see the director's cut of Justice League, believing it to be the purest version of the film. On Twitter, the hashtag Release the Snyder Cut has trended on and off since the film's theatrical release. Ben Affleck, who portrayed Batman in the film, and Gal Gadot, aka Wonder Woman, recently tweeted out the hashtag in support of the release. The superhero actors joined their co-stars Jason Momoa, Ray Fisher, and Jeremy Irons, who have all previously spoken out in support of Snyder's cut of the film. Now, let me say, why wouldn't they? A lot of the work they did, good work, hasn't been seen. And the film is considered a disappointment by everyone, not just the studio, but most people who saw it. And all the actors and people who worked on the movie know that there's a better version of the film that we have not seen. And why wouldn't you want to see that? Why wouldn't the actors want to see their work immortalized the way it should have been in the first place? Despite the fan demand for the film, it's unlikely that Warner Brothers will release Snyder's version of the film. For one, it was never a complete, polished film. Filmmaker Kevin Smith, who hadn't seen the cut, but knew others who had, said Snyder's version wasn't finished during an interview on Cinema Blend's Real Blend podcast. Quote, "It was a movie that people in production could watch and fill in the blanks. It was certainly not meant for mass consumption," he said. Warner Brothers declined to comment. There are many good reasons why Justice League's fans may not get to see the perceived justice they want. Quote, I haven't heard one word about releasing the cut, Jeff Box, senior box office analyst at Exhibitor Relations, said. Warner Brothers isn't focusing on past films, but instead is looking to the future of the DC movies. After a series of misfires, which included lackluster critical responses to Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice and Suicide Squad, the studio has hit its stride with hits like Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Shazam, and Todd Phillips' recent Joker. Sean Robbins, chief analyst at Box Office Media, said, not dwelling in the past is a primary reason why a Snyder Cut seems unlikely. Quote, they recognize that their start to the DC era of movies didn't go as well as they hoped, Robbins said. They've also made a lot of strides since then that have done really well and were more well-liked by fans. It's likely Warner Brothers wants to keep moviegoers focused on its upcoming titles like Birds of Prey, which is also undergoing, I've heard, massive overhauls, Wonder Woman 1984, The Batman, and a possible second Joker film. Warner Brothers also doesn't want to insult the filmmakers and crew that it brought in to patch up the project, Robbins said. The directors, meanwhile, have moved on to other productions. Whedon has been hired to direct a Batgirl film by Warner Brothers, but ultimately decided it wasn't a good project for him. Snyder is currently making a zombie movie for Netflix. Not to mention there may be little to no financial benefit to releasing Snyder's cut. The studio probably honestly wouldn't make a lot of money from it. Would they want to spend anything to update or finish a lot of the visual effects work that probably wasn't complete? Even if studio wants to, would they be willing to spend the money to put it out there on something they realize probably won't make their money back after the original already underperformed? Superhero fans and actors do have some power when it comes to influencing Hollywood film studio. Notably, the cast of Guardians of the Galaxy rallied behind director James Gunn after Disney fired him for tweets he posted a decade ago. He was later reinstated to write and direct the third installment of that franchise, and fans outraged that Disney and Sony could not come to terms on how to keep Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe swayed the companies to eventually strike a deal. Even fans outside of the superhero genre have been able to influence productions. Just days after releasing the trailer for Sonic the Hedgehog, the film based on a video game character of the same name, the film's director tweeted in May that Paramount and Sega would be redesigning the character. Longtime fans of the speedy blue hedgehog had found the character's facial features, including human-like teeth and his body proportions, to be inconsistent with the Sonic they grew up with in the 90s. The film was supposed to be released in November, but it has been pushed to February 2020. But there's one big difference between these films and Justice League. The studios have lots of money riding on the future of these movies. That is perhaps the best thing to remember when you're thinking about whether or not there'll ever be a Snyder Cut of Justice League. It's still developing at this point, Robin said. My perspective is if we are still talking about this in 6 months, there might really be something to it. Until then, fans of the Snyder Cut will have to take solace in the fact that the stars of the movie seem to be on their side, a fact that both Bach and Robbins say is notable. Put it out on DVD, Blu-ray, and streaming, Bach said. It can't hurt the film, which is a speed bump at best in the DC universe. The general public doesn't really care one way or another. This is mostly superhero fans and media types. That was from today. Also dropping today, speaking of the Snyder Cut, Ahil Dayani dropped this article today on Heroic Hollywood. Justice League composer Danny Elfman reveals thoughts on Zack Snyder Cut movement. Justice League composer Danny Elfman has revealed his thoughts on the ever-growing Zack Snyder Cut movement. In the past few weeks, thanks to the members of the Justice League taking to social media, the Zack Snyder Cut has gained intense momentum. Almost everyone who's worked on the film has mentioned the Zack Snyder Cut of the film, including Justice League's original composer, Junkie XL, who stated that he's made music for it. Joss Whedon, who took over directorial duties for Zack Snyder after a family tragedy, handpicked Danny Elfman to take on the score for Justice League. Fans might remember Danny Elfman's scores for Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns. In a recent interview with Joe.ie, Danny Elfman, who replaced Junkie XL as composer for Justice League, was asked about his thoughts on the Zack Snyder Cut. Well, the thing is, quote, the thing is, he never finished it. So I don't know quite how they'll do that. He had a tremendous tragedy which forced him to not finish the film. So it wasn't like, I don't quite understand this, because it wasn't like he was fired and that there's a director's cut that is a finished movie and that the studio fired him and then hired Joss Whedon. When Joss came on the film, he stepped in with only a few days' notice to pick up the helm because of this terrible tragedy that happened. So it's a unique situation. I mean, there's definitely other movies where the director was fired and the studio radically changed the movie because they didn't like it. And as a fan, you go, quote, I wonder what the director did before the studio changed the movie. But I'm not really aware of how that dynamic would apply here. It appears that, despite composing the final score of the film for replacement director Danny Elfman, genuinely has no idea regarding the situation regarding the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. According to this quote, Danny Elfman doesn't necessarily feel biased against it, but rather just curious about the whole falling out between Zack Snyder and the studio. As time goes on, support for Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League continues to become more apparent. Gilbert, does Gilbert want a cookie? Okay. As you all know, and if you're watching the show for the first time, Gilbert and Tallulah are part of this show, and they're here. And Gilbert likes to get cookies. And when Gilbert wants to get cookies, who am I to say no? No, you only get a second cookie after your sister has one. So there's a cookie for you and another cookie for you. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Gilbert, of course, the Bernedoodle. He is 25% Bernese Mountain Dog and 75% Poodle. Aren't you? Yes, you are. Now you have to get down. Give me a kiss, baby. Yeah, no, you get down. You get down. Good boy. I can't believe I just let a dog kiss me again on camera, on the internet for all to see. But there you go. And he kissed my nose, too. So anyway, not much of an article. But what I find interesting about the, as I said, it's 33% of your budget goes into post. I believe, knowing what I do about movie post-production, that there is indeed a cut of the Snyder version of Justice League. But I don't believe it's anywhere near completion to the point where you could watch it and say it's a finished film. Now, I was talking about this both on the John Campea show and on Twitter, and I was saying there might be $50 million, it could be $100 million of work left. I don't know. I have no idea. However, as a filmmaker myself who's producing a movie that I also edited that I am now post-supervising, I know that the first time we screened the movie, the first time we had a cut of it, was 14 months ago. Now, for various reasons, because it's an independent movie and we've had to raise money as we went, that cut you could watch. Hell, I did lots of temp visual effects myself. Well, over the past year, all of the post-production work that we had to do, visual effects, music, sound effects, ADR, all that work takes time. And I don't believe that the cut of the Snyder version of Justice League is in any, I don't think it's anywhere near a finished movie, which is a very different thing than having a cut of a film. Now, I'll give you a story. When I first saw Return of the King, as I'm fond of saying on the show, I saw it in Peter Jackson's house. We saw the same cut of the movie that he had to show the New Zealand government. You could watch it from beginning to end. You could sit down and watch Return of the King from beginning to end. Hell, it even had more endings than the finished film does. You saw where Legolas went. You saw where Gimli went. But the film, while you could watch it from beginning to end, I would say it was about 15% of what it would eventually be when it was finished. It had another year of work, all kinds of work. So I would assume that the Snyder cut of Justice League has that same amount of work to be done. Now, I understand and everybody's going to be coming at me like, you don't know what you're talking about. The funny thing about it is, as somebody who makes movies, who's somebody who worked at Warner Bros., albeit a long time ago, but knows how their post-production pipeline worked, because it hasn't changed much, although it has in the digital era. But I even got to participate a great deal in the pipeline, the post-pipeline of Superman Returns, to watch how that film developed every step of the way. But I will say this. There is no easy Snyder cut that can just be fixed over a couple of weeks. I guarantee you that there are extensive effects work that still needs to be finished. There is an entire sound mix that needs to be done. Now, they do have what they've built for what exists. But I would imagine that what we see, especially with whole characters and subplots, there's a lot of the movie that just was never addressed. Things, if the movie was indeed, and by the way, I want to see that 214-minute version. If that was his cut, if that was his true, and by the way, I don't believe, I'm sure he was going to do a shorter cut of that, but let's just say it was. Let's just say there's a 214-minute version of Justice League that exists. There's a lot of work that needs to still be done on that movie because they never finished all of those scenes with all of the other characters that were in the film. They didn't finish the sound design. They didn't finish the visual effects. Those things were removed. They weren't finished and then dispensed with. They were unfinished and dispensed with because it's a lot harder to dispense with a lot of finished footage. They'd make more use of it. So I think that the version of the Snyder Cut that exists is a very different version of the movie, not only from what we saw, but in terms of being a finished film. And by the way, I have an alternative. I don't know, but we're talking here's what people don't understand about movies. Studios don't just sit on a bunch of money to make movies. They borrow the money. They borrow the money from banks. Sure, they've got money from banks, but they've got cash flow. They have to borrow the money. And they borrow the money, and they're able to borrow money because there is, when they first start out, an expectation that that money is going to be paid back. Now, let's just say, people say, well, Joker's making $500 million, so why can't they just shuffle over some of that Joker cheddar and make the Justice League Snyder Cut? Movies don't work that way. They just don't work that way. That's not how something is financed in the film world. So if they could figure out one of the great things that's coming out is, of course, HBO Max, which is Warner Brothers' streaming service. Now, one of the things about streaming services, as we've seen with Netflix, is they don't necessarily then, if you sell your movie to a streaming service, you don't have the pressure to perform at the box office or in other ancillary medias like, well, physical media, or being split apart or given to other streaming services because it's on that one streaming service. So that part of the movie making, what would you call it? The revenue stream is different. I think that if we could see a Snyder Cut of the movie, the only way that it's ever going to get done is if it's done for HBO Max. And dare I say it, if it is done for HBO Max, there's no time constraint. If there truly is a 214-minute version of the movie, that is great, and that's the version that Zack Snyder wants to finish. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for HBO Max. I mean, look, Quentin Tarantino did a whole new version of The Hateful Eight for Netflix. He recut the movie into 4-hour-long episodes. A lot of new footage we'd never seen. What a great way to see the film. The Irishman's 3.5 hours. It's being put out by Netflix. So the Snyder Cut, if it could be turned into something that's viable, why not finish it for HBO Max? I think that's something really interesting to show. The problem is there are even analytics associated with that. How many viewers would that actually would be interested? Now, we as the fan community, here's something that we as fans, we're very myopic in that we don't think about the larger picture. We want what we want. We know what we know, and we think we know everything. But we frequently don't take into consideration all of those things that we don't think about. And one of the least sexy things to think about is the economics of movie making. How does it work? And who's paying for it? Where is that money coming from? I mean, when I read people write to me and they're like, well, what about all the money Warner Brothers making on Joker? You have to understand, a movie is a singular business unto itself. Each movie, and I know this is sort of strange to think about each individual movie. When you make a movie, you start an LLC. The LLC is the company that is actually going to make the film. So it's unto itself. It's not like Warner Brothers is starting out, and Warner Brothers, depending, it might be financed by multiple sources, but when movies are made, think of each movie as an individual business. Now, what happens is that business is set up, people are paid through that business, and when the movie is finished, another entity, buys that film or licenses that film. Most of the time, buys it. So the business that was created to make the movie then sells the film to someone else. And however they do it, there's lots of I can begin, the legalities are amazing. But these are considerations that a lot of people don't quite understand. Also, you're above the line talent, actors, directors, writers. Their contracts are not just like Warner Brothers is hiring you to make this movie. No. In a contract like that, there are contingencies. If this gets turned into a television show, if this gets turned into a streaming series, there's marketing, merchandising. There's so much in all of these contracts that it's very Byzantine. Pardon me, not Byzantine. That's the wrong word. Labyrinthian is the word I was looking for. These contracts can be very labyrinthian, and Byzantine is very different. Not what I wanted to use. That was not the right word. So labyrinthian. So these contracts, having a movie like this, if you want to do a different cut of Blade Runner and all that, that's one thing, because Ridley Scott's working on that. Everyone who owns the original movie owns that film. But in the case of Justice League, it was finished by another director. If Joss Whedon, what are you going to say to him? The guy that directs 2 Avengers movies, and what was his contract? I have no idea. I have no insight into these contracts, but it's not the same situation as another director coming in and putting out a new version of the film. Also, the world has changed. Physical media sales have plummeted. When they were making the new cuts of Daredevil or the new cuts of Watchmen, we were making lots of money with physical media. All of that, as we talked about on this show, physical media and streaming services, and they've disrupted these economic models. And it was physical media that you could rely on to be like, oh, there's going to be a director's cut, the extended versions of Lord of the Rings, the director's cut of Daredevil, a longer cut of Watchmen, ultimate cut of Watchmen. There was remember, that was almost a decade ago. The landscape was very different, very different. So there was economic models that they could plug into and go, okay, if we do this movie and we have a physical release of it on DVD and Blu-ray, we can expect to generate this much money. They know how much, say, Walmart was going to take. So they had economic models that were viable. They can go to a bank and go, hey, we want to borrow $20 million to do the extended version of Return of the King, because we knew how much we were going to sell. So that money, no problem. You need $20 million to prepare the extended cut of Return of the King? Drop in the bucket. They knew how much money they were going to get back. Well, now in this day and age, how much money they're going to get back? Does HBO Max, are they going to want to spend that money? Remember, HBO Max, and people are always throwing at me, well, what, they bought South Park for $500 million and they bought Friends for $500 million. Those economic models have nothing at all to do with Justice League. Nothing, because they have analytics. They know what Friends and they know what South Park is going to mean to a streaming service. There isn't any. Remember, Justice League wasn't a hit. I mean, sure, it made a lot of money, but not nearly as much money as they needed it to make to become profitable. So Justice League is basically a failed proposition. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to convince a studio to throw good money after bad. How do you do that? How do you go to a bank and go, yeah, man, we're going to do the Snyder Cut, and look at all these people. They mount campaigns at the San Diego Comic-Con. They fly planes over the convention center. You know, they're on Twitter. Those people can raise money. 150,000 or 200,000 people sign this petition. Well, if 200,000 people even coughed up however much money they need to cough up, is that enough to do what they need to do to finish the movie? What if the budget to finish the Snyder Cut is 25 to say 50 million? Again, I know about Post, but I have no understanding of where they're at. I don't know. I know visual effects are very expensive, and I know a movie like Justice League with all the green screen and everything they did, there's a lot of money that needed to be spent to get that movie into shape. I don't know how much that costs. No idea, but I'll tell you one thing, it ain't cheap. And as far as I know, you can't crowdfund that money. So the economic realities of there's people here. The economic realities of the Snyder Cut are something that needs to be addressed before anybody can decide whether or not there'll ever be a Snyder Cut. Maybe Warner Brothers will look into that. Maybe they won't. Maybe there'll never be a Snyder Cut. Who knows? But the fact is, the economic realities are pretty much the greatest hurdle facing something like that getting done. Now, do I think HBO Max is probably the best bet? Sure. As a matter of fact, if I was in charge of Warner Brothers, I would say, why not revisit all three movies? Go back to Man of Steel, go back to Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and go back to Justice League, and have Zack Snyder come in and perhaps caress them all together and call it the Man of Steel trilogy or something. Come up with some, like there's the Cornetto trilogy, with Edgar Wright's movies, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End. I mean, something like that could be very cool. Who knows? It could be a big event. I think that's the way to do something like that. But people have to understand that the business of Hollywood is not such that anybody just has money lying around that they're going to spend however much to do whatever. And also remember, I asked Brian once, Singer, I said, Brian, the version of Superman Returns that exists is not as good as the original version of the film that everybody saw initially. He knows it. I know it. I go, wouldn't it be cool to put it together and do the director's cut of Superman, especially with Brandon Routh coming back to the role in Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW? Brian said to me, he goes, what? It's ancient history. It's how many years ago now? Came out in 2006. I mean, if I couldn't get the director excited, I think Zack Snyder would love to come back and do the Snyder Cut of the movie. But again, you need the money and you need the studio to okay it. And there's a lot of legal ramifications that I have to say are things nobody wants to take into consideration, the business realities and the contractual realities behind doing something like that. Everybody thinks that, there's the Donner Cut and there's the versions of Watchmen and Blade Runner and all these things. The world was different. There was an economic model they could follow. They knew they would make money doing that. That model no longer exists. So there's no guarantee that anybody is going to get anything out of spending that money. And the real question is, does anybody want to admit that they might have made a mistake? It's hard. It's hard. Now, a lot of people have been firing in super chats and questions. So I want to get to that. I've got a few letters I want to read as well regarding this topic. So first and foremost, let's see what you guys have been saying. Josh Rosowskis is here. Josh says, I just watched Booksmart last night on Hulu. Great. Booksmart's a wonderful movie. It really is. And it really deserved a lot more box office success than it received. And I'm surprised it didn't make as much money. Anthony Gonzalez says, the frost, sometimes it makes the blade stick. That's, of course, from the Battle of Germania in Gladiator. Or it was when the people were going to try and kill Maximus. Factual Opinion says, what was the year 2020 like in the Star Trek mythos? Off the top of my head, Factual Opinion, I would have to go check back into that. I don't know where we were in 2020, to be honest, and which version in the Kelvin verse. JB Bonifacio says, I saw behind the scenes of the stagecraft tech. It's amazing, but I think the process of it might actually be why it seems small in production to you. Well, I don't know if it necessarily, look, what JB is talking about is the stagecraft process that they've refined to use to make The Mandalorian. I don't necessarily think it's small. I like what they're doing with it, but like with every other tool, it depends what it is you're going to use it for and how you are going to use it. I think it's the possibilities for it are amazing. I really do. I think it's great. Stubble McShave says, choose one, lose one. Producer of a new Star Trek movie or showrunner of a Shogun miniseries remake. Oh, dude. I take Star Trek all day. You know what? I love the old Shogun miniseries. I see no reason to remake it. I really like what it is. So I'd go Star Trek all day, every day. Rick Berg said, everyone send $2 super chats so we can all buy a great pop culture cookie jar for the puppies. Wahoo. That's funny. That's actually a good gift. I do give my pets gifts for the holidays. So it was frank. It was fine. Mukbang Reviews says, who is your favorite teacher? Mine was Barbara Mack at Iowa State University. Rest in peace. A great attorney, food critic, equestrian, and journalist. She taught us etiquette in her home. Great teachers are priceless. What a great question. I have a lot of teachers I remember. The first teacher I really loved was my second grade teacher, Mrs. Bard. Or actually, she was Miss Bard, and then she got married and became Miss Reith. She was a babe. I was in love with her, completely in love with her, my second grade teacher. Then my sixth grade teacher, Bob Park. He's kind of a man's man. He was like the Marlboro Man. He was awesome. I loved him. He was stern, but a great guy. Then in junior high school, one of my favorite teachers was Chip Wall. I love Mr. Wall. He taught the ELP, the Extended Learning Program for Gifted Students. I loved him. He was a great teacher. Another teacher I liked, who's very intellectual, who I also had a crush on, Carol Pankey. Carol Pankey taught a course I took called Utopia, where we looked at utopian civilizations. I was a big fan of Carol Pankey's, and yeah, those are teachers that I really enjoyed. Firebomb says, just realized Arcade 1993 film was edited by you. I love that film from my youth. Any good memories while working on it? Well, Firebomb, let me tell you. So here's what Firebomb is referring to. My first feature editorial job, I've talked about this before, was on the Full Moon movie Arcade. And it was basically a low-budget movie that was about kids being sucked into an evil video game that co-starred John Delancey, but Megan Ward is in it, Seth Green is in it, of course, Peter Billingsley was in it. And it was directed by Albert Pune. When the movie was finished, it basically sat on a shelf, and it wasn't very good. And the visual effects, all the in-game stuff was shot on Betacam. The movie was shot in 35 millimeter, but the game stuff was shot on Betacam, and the special effects were just awful. So it sat on a shelf basically for 3 years, and nobody did anything with it. But Full Moon had to release it. So my buddy Dan Schweiger was in charge of putting the movie back together. And Peter Billingsley, don't shoot your eye out, kid, one of the executive producers of Iron Man, he took the job in the movie because he wanted to learn post-production. So he worked with the original editor of the film. The editor is listed, by the way, on the finished film as Miles Winton, which is actually the name of the editor's dog. So they basically cut the movie in a week, 10 days, and the movie was really not good at all. So Dan Schweiger brought Peter Billingsley back in to put what they were going to do is redo the effects, put the movie back the way it was, and drop in the effects. Well, my friend Dan Schweiger hired me to help Peter. And when I started working with Peter, him and I, by the way, were in a room for 6 months editing that movie on a tape system. Well, I looked at the footage and I said to Dan, I called Dan up and I said, Dan, there's a lot more footage in this movie than was ever edited. There's a lot better movie here. And he said to me, he's like, well, remember, this is back in 93. He goes, hey, man, have you ever cut a feature before? I'm like, no, I never had, but I got an A in editing at USC, and I've been doing a lot of music video work and short films. And was I qualified to cut a feature? Probably not, but I've been editing stuff my whole life. And so what we had to do was Peter and I were given the go-ahead to re-edit the first 10 minutes of the movie. And we took something that was unwatchable and turned it into what I would say is something pretty mediocre. But we were damn proud of that mediocrity. And we were able to do things like, because it was a video game, we could repeat shots And so you could take one shot. We had one CG shot, very early, rudimentary CG of like an energy ball coming around a corner like this. But since we were finishing on video, you could take that one shot and have it go one way, and then turn the shot, make a cut, and have it go up another way, and then have a third shot by spinning the same shot and using it over 3 different times, creating a bit of an action beat that was never there before. So Peter and I worked on that movie for 6 months editing it, and then we took it all the way through post. We worked with Alan Howarth, who worked with John Carpenter, and to do the sound design. DHD Post Image, I remember, I think it was a facility in Montreal that did the visual effects. So, and we recut, Peter and I, there wasn't one bit of the original movie that remained. We recut the whole film. And I learned more about post-production working on that movie. Like I've told this story before, but when we didn't know something, we had our colorist who was recoloring the negative, Bob Sachter, who worked at this video facility. And we would go, and when we didn't know what we didn't know, we would go ask him questions. And we used to take the guys up the street to Little Tony's and buy him pizza and beer. And in the course of the conversation, because we didn't want to look like noobs, we would kind of like work in the questions that we had about post into a little meal when we were eating pizza and beer. So they would answer, not thinking that we're asking them officially, looking like we don't know what we're doing. We'd kind of be like, hey, it's kind of like when they do this, right? And they would tell us. And that's how we learned to do post. We took this whole movie through post. And we were very excited because the VSDA, the Video Software Dealers Association of America, was nominated for Best Independent Direct-to-Video Release of 1993. It was beat by, I want to say, Dragon World, which was another full moon movie. It was a kids movie, and it won. But yeah, I mean, I can't even tell you, it was very funny because Peter and I actually met we'd go out, we'd cut, and then we'd go out at night. And Peter and I actually met these 2 girls that were like best friends, and we were dating them. And I'm still friends with that girl. Her name's Susan. She's delightful. She's married and has 2 kids, and recently had a cancer scare. But I don't know what that means, but it's true. And I learned everything I needed to learn about post-production, and it served me well. And then I worked on a lot of other independent movies not many people saw, but I would cut them and post-supervise them. That was back in the day when they still cut negative. So yeah, I'm glad. By the way, on the finished film, Peter and I are listed as additional editors. They couldn't give us, because remember, kids, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And the original editor of the film had negotiated the editorial credit, but he was not proud of it. So his dog gets the credit on the film. That's right. Miles Winton, the editor of Arcade, was in fact a dog. So there you go. Sujith is here. How you doing, buddy? Sujith says, I watched all 3 episodes of The Mandalorian. The trailer shows a gritty Western. The finished product in 3 episodes is good, but not gritty enough. I'll give it 8 out of 10. Sujith, I would agree with you. I like The Mandalorian. I think it's good. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but I appreciate what it's doing. I mean, I'd like to see where it's going to go. I mean, I've talked about, as much as people are talking about how great that 3rd episode was, and indeed there's cool stuff in it. I have a hard time believing that all of these things are happening basically on the same street. You have well, you know what? I'm not going to talk about spoilers, but I'm just saying that there are 3 factions in that episode, and they all seem to be hanging out. Like Werner Herzog says, well, there's never a certain kind of person around when you need one. Oh, unless you walk down the street and go into their secret enclave that's, 3 doors down. But I do like The Mandalorian. I'm liking every episode more and more. So we shall see. But yeah, I'm certainly digging it. Absolutely. Now I have a lot of first of all, I did want to finish up a thought about fandom. One of the things about fandom that I've been ensconced in fandom my whole life. But one of the things that I wanted to do when I was a fan and growing up loving movies and watching movies, and when I was 13, I did as much reading about the business of movie making. Like one of the books I read over and over and over again was a book called Adventures in the Screen Trade by William Goldman. And I think one of the things that I find distressing personally about a lot of my fellow fans, and certainly a lot of pundits that are working in the YouTube space, is they frequently miss and they frequently do not address the financial realities and the business realities of movies. We look at it more from the finished product and what we want to see and how did the finished product work for us. But one of the things that I always found just as fascinating as the movies themselves were all of the ins and outs of the actual business of movies. And I feel that a lot of that is lacking from the movie making space. Because what's really interesting, especially at the studio level, when I worked at Warner Brothers, every day after lunch, beginning at about lunches in Hollywood's always really 1 to 2. But after lunch at Warner Brothers, usually maybe it started at 3, depended how much dailies, there were executives, all the executives at Warner Brothers. There were production executives, and there were also the creative executives, the senior vice presidents that decided what movies were made. They covered certain movies were theirs. And every day they would have to go watch dailies. Now, I'm sure that's not the case anymore. I'm sure everybody watches all that stuff online. But just so you guys know, when a studio is watching a movie, when they're watching a movie develop, at least when I was there, it wasn't like they couldn't tell what was happening. It was an ongoing process, and they watched it every step of the way. It's not like somebody finally saw a final version of the film and then panicked. They knew. The studio knows. They know what they have. And what ends up happening is there's a lot of decisions that are made at an executive level that then trickle down to the actual film making level. That the people that are actually making the movies, the producer, the director, the writers, as filmmakers, what they're doing a lot of the time is very different than what's happening at the studio executive level. And then the studio executive level tends to come and step into something, and they're making decisions that are not necessarily based on what's there in terms of the movie. They're not necessarily filmmakers. So you wind up having decisions made like, oh, we'll hire a trailer company to cut Suicide Squad or cut sequences in Suicide Squad because somebody has the bright idea that, oh, we have to make it. Making a trailer is vastly different. Editing a trailer is vastly different from editing a movie. I mean, aside, you are editing images together, but it's a very different thing. And if you're not careful, you can't expect a trailer company to understand how to structure a satisfying movie. It's very, very different discipline. I've done both. They're very, very different things. But what fans need to understand is more of how the business works. And I think, look, if you want to bitch and moan and complain, and I do, but you should bitch and moan and complain and understand why things happen the way they happen. And the business of Hollywood would make learning more about how the business works would help our pundit space immeasurably. And, it begins with reading books like Adventures in the Screen Trade, or read Peter Biskin's books, or Easy Rider's Raging Bulls, or read the Rinsler books. My God, read the Rinsler books on the making of Star Wars, the making of Empire, and the making of Jedi. Now, those books, if you think you know Star Wars, read those Rinsler books. They give you not just an amazing look. He also wrote The Making of Alien that just came out and The Making of Planet of the Apes. But those books, especially the one on the making of Empire, are fascinating. And I implore every fan out there, all of us, all members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, read some books about the business of movie making, because it will only help inform your opinion. Because a lot of the time, remember, nobody in Hollywood is trying to fail. Everybody is trying to win. Everybody wants a successful film. That's what people are interested in more than anything else. Failure is not something anybody wants. But yeah, I have lots of new letters, by the way. I have lots of new letters from people. I'm so behind. I have 2 Willow Yang letters I haven't even read. But let me jump back in here. Shadow Zack 09 says, have you heard anything about Robert Downey Jr. being on Disney Plus for Marvel's What If? I keep hearing conflicting reports that he's going to do it at the same time he's not. What's your opinion? Well, Marvel's What If is an animated series that's going to be on, of course, Disney Plus. And it harks back to one of the great Marvel Comics series that I liked growing up, which was they were usually one-shots, and they were all alternate universe stories that were funny because a lot of them ended with the end of the universe or the end of the world. But one of my favorites was What If Conan the Barbarian was in the 20th century, and it had a great Bill Sienkiewicz cover. And it's got, the way I remember it, Conan the Barbarian has a gun and he's pointing it off the cover. But so they're doing a What If series. I guess they're doing 23. And they're going to, I guess, they're going to go over each individual movie and show us different outcomes or how it could have gone differently, which I think is really cool. And again, they took a cue from the comics. Now, I would imagine, doing voices for animation, it's not a whole lot of work. And I would imagine Robert Downey Jr. would come back and do it. I mean, he can set up an ISDN line. He could record in his house if he wanted to. But I don't have any information about that. I don't know one way or the other. I would assume he would. I don't know. Maybe. I would hope he would come back. Mustack Reviews says, "G'day, Rob. Been watching you for years, and your knowledge and passion is incredible. I love your work, and I really hope to meet you one day." Well, thank you very much. Listen, like I've always told people, if you ever see me at a convention or a screening or something, don't hesitate to come up and say hello. I mean, I'm a lifelong fan. The only reason I do this is to meet other fans, and share our passions as I, get older and have one foot in the grave. I keep saying, a lot. I want to share that passion. It's a great world. It's a great time. By the way, can I just say something in addition to other YouTubers I watched? There's a pretty funny video of Kevin Smith recounting that I watched this morning. It's like 13 minutes of the first 3 seasons of The Expanse. Now, I don't know how funny it is, but it's actually a pretty good primer. I'm like, oh, I'm glad I watched this. It's not like I was talking about Davey 504 at the beginning of this video, another YouTuber I greatly admire, and then a lot of the people who work in the Popcast videos and Justin's collection. I'll tell you, if I could be friends with somebody on YouTube, this guy Justin, I think he's in Australia, Justin's collection, he gets all the hot toys, all of them. I admire Justin. I'd love to get the hot toys he gets. But I want to thank you, Mustack Reviews, because hey, if nothing else, we're here to celebrate. It's all flash dance up in here. We want to take our passions and make it happen. A Firebomb. Mustack Review says, also have a question. I just read Kingdom Come, and I'm currently reading Crisis. What's another great storyline to read? Also, pumped for Crisis on the CW. I have to tell you, for those of you who don't know, there's a funny thing regarding Crisis. So DC put out I love Crisis on Infinite Earths. I've got the first graffiti design slip-cased hardcover of it that Marv Wolfman signed for me 20 years ago. I have the absolute edition of Crisis. So this year, I guess in anticipation of the Crisis TV series, DC put out a big box of, I think it's 15 different hardcovers of all the multiverse stories, and then all the Crisis on Infinite Earths stories and Crisis on Infinite Earths in this big box set that has a metal seal and it opens up. Well, I forgot I ordered it. I think I ordered it like a year ago. And I didn't realize when I ordered it was $500. I think on Amazon it's like $300. This is not necessarily, some months you run out of money. you run out of money. You just do. I mean, you get these channels going, but I'm an independent filmmaker, and there's a lot. I live with Elizabeth. We got dogs. We got teenage girls here. So sometimes when you forget you pre-order things, they just show up at your door, and you're like, ooh, I was not paying attention to my notifications from my bank account. But I will say this: it's badass. I mean, I collect omnibuses and hardcovers, and I probably, given a choice, I perhaps, if I had not forgotten, and it was, if I remember that, oh, this book came and they're shipping it to you now, I might have taken a pass on it. But you know what? I'm glad to have it. I'm putting it right up next to my box. I've got my giant Akira manga box that you open up, and then I got this Crisis box. I mean, I'm telling you. Wait till I move into my studio for the 300th episode. I was going to move in earlier, but I can't because I have a technical issue that I have to solve. But wait do you see Robservations go up to the next level. And I'm not going to make it. I'm just not going to make it. I wanted to have the 300th episode of this show on Saturday, December 7th. But I also found out that I have Schmodown. There's a live Schmodown show that I'm going to be participating at. So if you're a Schmodown fan, come meet me. Anyway, so the question you asked was about other DC stories to read. Well, Crisis obviously is great, and Kingdom Come is great. I really liked Identity Crisis that Brad Meltzer wrote. I really liked Identity Crisis a lot. Now, you might, I can't recommend, I mean, maybe I could recommend the Infinite Crisis or Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis. Yeah. I don't know. You got to read. I don't know what you've been reading, but you've got to read. You got to read Dark Knight Returns. Obviously, there's a lot of there's books like I would check out. I really like George Perez's Wonder Woman run that he wrote and drew after Crisis. The Wonder Woman after. If you're going to read Crisis and you're going to go back and delve into DC, the stuff they did after Crisis, like Burns, Superman run, is pretty interesting. You got to read The Death of Superman. It's a little goofy, but the Death of Superman storyline with the reign of the Superman storyline is pretty good. And there's a lot of, this just came. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Now I haven't opened this. I read reviews that say the binding kind of bends. This Alan Moore's Swamp Thing will change your life. This and Sandman. Good stuff. But yeah, there's a lot. I'd have to, you know what I've got to do? People are always asking me about books, like your favorite science fiction novels and your favorite horror novels. I need to come up with the Robservations, the Burnettwork essential reading list, which I'm going to do that before the holidays. So I will look into that. But yeah. Firebomb says, could Labyrinth be revisited? The Dark Crystal already was. Look, man, yes. My answer to that is yes. After seeing how great the Dark Crystal was, by God, revisit Labyrinth. Why not? And please bring back Jennifer Connelly. I mean, she was damn cute in Labyrinth. I mean, you know what, though? I mean, could you revisit Labyrinth without David Bowie? Maybe you could get somebody else, but I think it would be tough. But you could. I mean, I like the world of Labyrinth. I think it'd be great. I guess you would have Jennifer Connelly grow up or something. But I think absolutely what you need is again, a great story and great characters. I think you can do anything if you have that. Now, this letter came in from Carl Adams. Hello, Robert. First, I would like to thank you for making a community that is inclusive of everyone while still not being afraid to question certain agendas or motivations from both sides of the spectrum. Earlier today, I was listening to you and John Campea discuss the Snyder Cut on the John Campea Show. You were both bringing up reasons Warner Brothers might or might not have to finish and release it. That made me think about the Veronica Mars movie that was mostly fan-funded. Fans contributed $5.7 million to the making of that movie. I am sure it would take several times that amount of money to finish the Snyder Cut, but do you think such a gesture by fans would motivate WB into finishing the Snyder Cut? With the number of articles and YouTube videos I see dedicated to the Snyder Cut, I find it hard to believe that fans would not be able to raise quite a bit of money for the project. I am also curious as to what you think about the future of fan-funded projects in the future. I have seen Legion M raising money from fans for different projects on social media. Do you think this is something we will see more of in the future? Thanks again for doing what you do. That comes from Carl Adams. Carl, great question. For those of you who might not remember, Veronica Mars, before it was a Hulu series, they did a movie. There was a Veronica Mars movie, and it was crowdfunded. Rob Thomas, the creator of Veronica Mars, was able to launch a crowdfunding campaign. Now, here's something people forget. He already had distribution in place for the film, and he was working with Warner Brothers. So the crowdfunding campaign allowed them it made it viable. And he knew he was going to be able to put that out. Crowdfunding is different now. By the way, I'm a huge fan of Veronica Mars. I thought the movie was pretty good. It wasn't great, but it was good. And it was interesting because you had to distill a movie or a series that worked over the course of a season into a movie. But I think they did a good job. I thought it was handsomely made. I enjoyed it. And it was really interesting. I mean, it was, yes, a fan-motivated campaign, but you already had the original creator, and the original creator had the studio on board before it even began. So it wasn't like Rob Thomas decided just randomly to go do this. Crowdfunding for fan projects it's different than it was a while ago. Again, the prospect of finishing the Snyder Cut is a costly one. And I don't know exactly how much it's going to cost, but it's millions and millions of dollars. I don't know if, first of all, fans would they be willing to do that? Would they be even if 1 million fans gave $20 each and you made $20 million less whatever the crowdfunding site is? Maybe, I mean, what's really interesting is I've been fascinated by what's going on in the toy world with HasLabs doing both Jabba's sail barge and Unicron. I don't know, did they make their and recently, by the way, there's a crowdfunding campaign that just ended to make a really high-end model of the Rocinante from The Expanse. They were able to get official permission, and they made it was like $200. I didn't do it. I should have. But the holidays are coming up, and I can't spend money on myself. I got to, save. So it's tough enough keeping up with all the money that goes out the door here. But so fan campaigns can do a lot. Legion M is really interesting. I know a lot of people who work at Legion M. I think what they're doing is really interesting. They haven't financed something on their own yet, I don't think. They've come in to co-finance, or I guess help with promotion. It's going to be really interesting to see if how is their model going to work? Are they going to do they have economic sustainability? What really matters is, how can anybody get a return? As many people know, I was involved with the Axanar project, which worked out great at first, and then sort of you can read all about it. But that was a fan project as well. And I think that there's definitely going to be, as we move into the future, I mean, hell, this show is sustained by super chats, and I don't really pay much attention to Patreon much anymore, and people that join the website. I mean, the website we have, the Burnettwork website's expensive because of the bandwidth it's been taken. We have to keep adding money to it, and that it's entirely financed by fans. And of course, I can keep the show going by super chatting or whatever. It keeps the show going. So I think that fans paying for what they like is definitely a part of the future landscape. Now, the problem is how that works with an entity like a movie studio is unclear. With Rob Thomas, the creator of Veronica Mars, he was able to pre-negotiate all of that stuff. And everybody was surprised at how much money the Veronica Mars campaign made. I don't know if that would happen again. There's a lot more layers of bureaucracy to deal with when it comes to the Snyder Cut. But it would be interesting to see. It would be interesting to see if Warner Brothers, if they did more along the lines of what HasLab is doing. Like, yes, we want to make a Jabba the Hutt sail barge, and until we get to 5,000, we have to if 5,000 people give us $500, then we'll make it. I think if that ever worked, maybe we'll see more of that. But in the case of the Snyder Cut, I don't think any amount of money can be raised on. It's not like games. It's not like Star Citizen or something like that. I don't know if there's enough people that could raise enough money that it would make it economically viable. But who's to say? I don't know. I think that if there's enough people that want it, hell, I want to see the Snyder Cut. I'd kick into that campaign. I just don't know if there's enough people that would. I really don't. By the way, I very much appreciate you saying that you like the community. I mean, I really do enjoy interacting with everybody. It really has, I dare say it, doing this show has enriched my life, certainly. And meeting a lot of you and having the community that we've built, and it keeps getting bigger every day. Sometimes it gets a lot bigger, depending on if I'm on a different show or something. But I have new subscribers every day, and I've got plans. I haven't even been doing this for a year yet. I've only been doing this for 11 months, and I'm really surprised. One of the things I like about Davey504, and if you guys haven't seen his channel, the guy's delightful. He delights me on so many different levels. He's very smart. He's also very, very funny, and he's very tied into internet culture, and it's very funny. But one of the things, like, I wouldn't want to steal his shtick, but one of the things that he does is he's always saying, like, he has funny things. If you want to hear me, because he's Italian, and he's like, if you want to hear me speak Italian, I need to get to 4 million subscribers, and I'll speak Italian. His big thing now is he's never laughed on his channel ever, and if he gets to 5 million subscribers, he'll laugh. Well, for me, I'm like, I've got 15,000 subscribers. But I feel like there should be sort of milestones. We should do milestones to help the community grow. But I don't know. I mean, maybe my appeal is only limited to a certain group. One of the things that one of the things I don't want to do, one of the things I will not do, is I try and focus more on positivity and my excitement, because I am, with the exception of Star Trek, I'm very positive and excited about most of all of this stuff. There's so much great stuff surrounding us. So many awesome things that I'm excited about on every level, whether it's home entertainment and media. Heck, man, speaking of Italians, 4K Suspiria. They already did. Last year, when I pre-ordered this, I knew they were going to do a 4K. I knew Don May was going to drop the 4K, But this was one of the movies when I was a kid, when I was bootlegging, and finding Suspiria at all, much less an uncut version of it, was like a grail thing. It was so hard to get this movie. And to know that a guy like Don May from his company, Synapse, Don May is like a total, John Schnepp would have called him a sweaty. But there's guys like Don May out there who've been working for years to bring you great entertainment, cult titles or whatever. And one of his grails was to bring his life's work, was to bring us Suspiria, the definitive version of Suspiria. And he did that, and we live in a world where, and now the 4K disc is out. We live in a world where there's so many people that are doing so many great things on different levels in the fan community, that it sort of, for me, offsets when everybody's so angry. Even though there's a lot of guys, there's a lot of people online. Like, I watch a lot of Nerdrotic, of Gary Beekler's channel. I like Gary Beekler. I've never met him. We've had a few interactions online, but I like his channel. I like his passion. And while, yeah, he does focus a little bit on the negative aspects of things, at least he does so in a thoughtful way. And I like watching him. He's the kind of guy that he doesn't drink, but he's the kind of guy that I could definitely sit down and have a meal with, and it would probably last for 8 hours, just because we'd never have anything that we would never stop talking. And Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, I was on his channel, not necessarily. By the way, I thought we had a delightful conversation. I really liked talking to Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, and because of that conversation, I had a lot of people come to this channel. So I really appreciate that people find something unique in the community that we're building, but I couldn't do it without you guys and girls and gentle beings and however many gendered people you are. And if you, even there's aliens here, you're all welcome in this community. All I ask is that you show everybody else here respect. That's it. That's basically my rule. So I want to thank you for writing, Carl. That was very nice of you to say. I have another letter here. This is a funny letter. Okay, so this letter comes from Christopher Collins. Christopher Collins says, you introduced me through Collider Heroes to a character by the name of Paste Pot Pete back on January 24th, 2017. Is there a precedence in Marvel Comics for Ant-Man to go against Paste Pot Pete? What type of story could you see with these two characters in an Ant-Man film? Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, there is a character named the Trapster who went up against the Human Torch. The Trapster is a Silver Age character who originally appeared. Wait a minute, let me get this right. I gotta get this right. The Trapster originally appeared, who's one of the first supervillains who became active during the Silver Age of Marvel Comics. He makes his first appearance as Paste Pot Pete. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there's a character in Marvel Comics named Paste Pot Pete, and John Schnepp and I and Amy Dallin would often talk about Paste Pot Pete on Heroes. He made his debut in Strange Tales number 104 in 1963, and as the Trapster in Fantastic Four 38. Paste Pot Pete. Why I love Paste Pot Pete is because Paste Pot Pete, or the Trapster, gave he created a solvent. One of my favorite things when I was a kid was a comic book, it was Power Records, and they were comic books that had records with voices, and you'd read the comic and follow along with the record, you know, and the record was like a dramatization of the comic book. And one of my favorites was Captain America and the Falcon, and they had to deal with an offshoot of Baron Zemo and Adhesive X. Adhesive X! It can't be. The villain who created it died years ago. I watched him die. Well, why I like Paste Pot Pete is he actually found a solvent that he gave to the Avengers to dissolve Adhesive X. Could Paste Pot Pete fight against Ant-Man? Sure. I don't know how that would really work. Maybe Paste Pot Pete, they're going after the same thing. I can't imagine. I can't imagine, Christopher, but I don't know what I would see. I mean, you know, maybe there's a heist. Maybe the Trapster and Ant-Man want the same thing. They're going after the same thing. It's a Ocean's 11 situation, but they want the same stuff. They're going after the same thing, I guess. I don't know. But yes, Paste Pot Pete. Who knows? I have not. Jerem Mananen is here. Is it? It's Manian. I always get your last name wrong, and I apologize. Have I read the Revelation Space series? I have not. I have not read the Revelation Space series, but I have a few of them. And I have not. And I'm going to see which ones I have here. Oh, wait. You know what? I do have. I have Revelation Space. I've not read it. I have the first book. I know because of the cover as I look it up. Yes, I have that first book, Revelation Space, but I haven't read any others, and I have not read it. It's one of those books. You know what? I'll tell you, when I was writing for magazines and stuff, when I wrote for Sci-Fi Universe magazine, as a matter of fact, this is how I got Game of Thrones. So nobody would take the books. Like, they would send us hardcover books to read. And a lot of people weren't interested. And I was always taking the books. Like, we had stacks of new science fiction books, hardcover books. that they would send us, and I collect a lot of books. So that was a book. The first Revelation Space was a book that I got. I wasn't working for. Where was I working? I was working at a company that was getting free books, and that's where I got that book, and I've just never read it. So I need to read it, but I have it on my bookshelf. And by the way, I alphabetize all my books under author's last name, so you can find it there. But I got to read it because now I feel guilty I haven't read it. Mustack Reviews says back, Rob, I'm from Australia. Should reach out to this guy Justin for you. Also, thoughts on my unpopular opinion. I do not like Donner's Superman 2 cut at all. Well, okay, that's really interesting. Donner's Superman 2 cut is compromised because they didn't have all the footage they needed to actually finish it, to put it back the way he wanted to put it back. So I understand. I mean, to me, it's an interesting oddity, but I don't see the Donner cut of Superman 2 as replacing Superman 2 to replace Lester's cut. I don't like it more. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite moments isn't even in it. Kneel before Zod. Come to me, Superman. Gentlemen, would you care to step outside? That's not even in Donner's cut. But I agree with you. I think the Donner cut is really interesting, and it's a roadmap to see where he would have taken the movies. And I really think it's unfortunate we never got Donner's full cut of Superman 2 because they were made together. And it's a bummer. But it's cool that we have it. And I'm with you there. I don't know if Justin, I think he's from Australia. I just again, here's one of the things I really love about YouTube. I like finding, I guess the way people have said that they like this community, I love finding people on YouTube, other YouTubers who I like to watch and feel like, okay, even though we might disagree or we come at things from different perspectives, we're all fans. Like the baseline is that we're fans, and I like that. And there's a lot of people I just love Hot Toys figures, and I think Justin's collection, the way he sets it up, he's got one of the best collections on YouTube, and I envy him. That's why I'm hoping when I move into the new studio, I'll have most of my Hot Toys set up. I think I've figured out a way, because a lot of the kind of, I just don't have a room here. I'm in the laundry room basically, and when I move into the garage is all mine, and I'm setting up this. I've been doing it for a year, but setting up this set, and I figured out a way that isn't. It's hard to buy a huge display case. If I owned this house rather than rent it, I would. I might get a big giant permanent display case, but I think I figured out a way where I can do it with. And these glass cases, I mean, I've never even lit them up because they're old and the lighting system is broken and I have to fix them. But, I want to do that. But Justin's collection, I watch all of his videos. He does unboxings of Hot Toys, and he also gets third-party figures, and he's got a great display. I like what he does. Plus, I just like him. There are YouTubers I just like listening to. I like listening to their voice. And Analog Toys, too. The guy, I think he's Australian as well. Analog Toys is another guy whose YouTube channel I watch. And I have to tell you, not only do I like his videos, but he has impeccable taste when it comes to collecting toys. He basically has all like the original issues of things, and maybe because we're probably around the same age, he maybe he's younger than me or something, but I love the toys he has. He's got a very well curated collection, and I really appreciate that. And Davey 504 has nothing to do with genre, but if you like the bass guitar, and I just like his everything he does, I like. And even though he doesn't need me to tell him how great he is, he's got almost 5 million subscribers. But so yeah, go find him, reach out to him. Mustack Reviews also says, Kingdom Come question: before Soups went into retirement, did he have the original Superman logo? So is Brandon Routh in Crisis his film version just after? That's a really good question. I mean, I love the fact that Brandon Routh is wearing the Kingdom Come version, or a version of the Kingdom Come suit, because I like that S. But I don't know. I mean, I think probably, Superman, he's older. I mean, I never liked, one of the things that even as a kid bothered me, why didn't superheroes have like 8 different versions of their costumes that they would wear? I understand. It's brand recognition. And also, if you had 8 different super suits, who would want to draw them all? you need Superman to look like Superman and Batman to look like Superman, or Batman to look like Batman. But it always bothered me that there was not like a halfway point between civilian garb and your costume. And that's why I like the idea that Superman, he would just change it up. He changed his logo after something happened. He wanted people to remind, the black with his logo reminded everyone of, I don't know, some cataclysmic event or something. But it's a good question. I'd like to think that Brandon Routh is the Kingdom Come Superman. Because wouldn't it be cool if he was? I think so. I think it would be cool. I've got so many more letters to read. I'm going to see if I can bang some of them out. Let's see. This is kind of a controversial letter. This letter comes from Stubble McShave, our boy Stubble, longtime viewer from Sweden. Hi, Rob. With the recent box office bombs of old franchise movies like the new Terminator movie, I can see a potential bomb coming in 2021. I'm speaking of the new Indiana Jones movie. As you say, movies have a shelf life of 20 years or so. Indiana Jones was essentially a franchise of the 80s, with Raiders being released in 1981 and Last Crusade in 1989. Crystal Skull was released in 2008, which was 19 years after The Last Crusade, and caught the tail end of that shelf life. Unfortunately, Crystal Skull didn't revitalize the franchise since it was a pretty awful movie. And that means that the movies that we primarily associate with Indiana Jones right now are 30 years old or more. Crystal Skull also damaged the brand of Indiana Jones quite significantly. The whole franchise took a hit from it being terrible. It seems like Harrison Ford will play Indiana Jones again, and his stardom and marketability has dropped quite a bit since his heyday. The results of Blade Runner 2049 and The Age of Adeline have shown that his name alone doesn't sell tickets like it used to. Dude, don't you dare diss The Age of Adeline with, oh my God, with Blake Lively and Harry. It's so good. I love Age of Adeline. No, I know you're not dissing it, but if you haven't seen Age of Adeline, get on that. If you want to see you just got to watch it. It's a magical film. I love it. And where's that director? The creators of the next Indiana Jones movie can't just make an okay movie and think that the brand recognition will make them $1 billion. They have to make a great movie for it to be successful. When making Indiana Jones, the writing is probably more important than for most other movies. Indiana Jones was never successful for its spectacle. Indiana Jones was successful for its storytelling, humor, ideas, and characters, and action set pieces. As I said earlier, it seems like Harrison Ford will play Indy again, and I have mixed feelings about that. I like the thought of having an older protagonist kick ass while solving the riddles of some old myth in a fun way, but I think if they want to take this IP into the future, then they have to introduce us to a new face playing Indy. What would I do if it were up to me? I think that I would have the movie set in the 70s. Maybe as an Easter egg, have a movie theater announcing that they're showing Star Wars or Close Encounters in the background. We would follow an older Indiana Jones solving a mystery set in the late 70s and intercutting that with adventures from his earlier life, where the earlier adventure is related to the one set later, where we are introduced to a younger Indy played by a new actor, which is set in an earlier time period. As I said, the writing on this is really important, and if they don't have a great story with a great mystery, which plays on our imagination, then don't do it. If they do a new Indiana Jones movie, which is all spectacle, and have a half-assed story, then it will follow Terminator and other franchises of the 80s and 90s into the abyss, and we'll probably never get another Indiana Jones movie for a long time. The one thing I think could work would be to have this movie set up a new Young Indiana Jones Chronicles for Disney Plus if they chose to go that route. I quite enjoyed the one with Sean Patrick Flanery, and I think it could work. Disney Plus is also in need of some new original material, and I can't think of a better property to have on the streaming service. A Young Indiana Jones Chronicle that is well executed could drum up the demand for more Indiana Jones movies and then make more movies when the IP is in a better state than what it is now. If they would ever make a post-credit scene for a new movie, I kind of would like to see this. The old Indiana Jones leaves a restaurant in Los Angeles in the late 70s. He meets up with a friend outside. The friend asks, "So who are those young bearded fellows you met with?" "Oh, just a couple of young filmmakers. They wanted to hear some of my old stories." "Did they believe you?" "I don't know." "Where's the car?" So, Rob, do you think Indiana Jones is destined to fail? And what would you do if you were producing the new Indiana Jones installment? I'd like to end with a quote from the book Death Masks. in the Harry Dresden series, which is relevant for so much of our discussions here, both when it comes to franchises and technology. It isn't good to hold on too hard to the past. You can't spend your whole life looking back, not even when you can't see what lies ahead. All you can do is keep on keeping on and try to believe that tomorrow will be what it should be, even if it isn't what you expected. Well, Stubble, as always, that is a great letter. You know, Indiana Jones is one of those franchises where it's Harrison Ford to me. And I think because you're right, you're talking from 1981 when Raiders came out to 2008. And I just think that if you have the same problem you have with trying to replace Han Solo with somebody younger, Alden Ehrenreich. In the case of what Harrison Ford did, they've been around. You're working on a half century of Indiana Jones, and same with Star Wars, 40 years of Harrison Ford. Nobody wants to see a Han Solo that isn't Harrison Ford. I think ultimately that was the problem with Solo. That's what I've said. That's why I've always said that they should have made an Indiana Jones movie with Ewan McGregor, because Ewan McGregor, of all the things in the prequel trilogy, I think his portrayal of Obi-Wan was absolutely beloved. And when you make a movie with him, there's a certain credibility there. It feels real. And so that was, I think, the mistake that they made with Solo. I mean, Lawrence Kasdan came along and said, I have an idea for a Solo movie. That's another thing. You can't blame Kathleen Kennedy has Lawrence Kasdan going, I want to make a Solo movie. I wrote a script or whatever. It's a good bet. She's not going to say no to that. But I do think that making an Indiana Jones movie, another Indiana Jones movie. Let's see, by the way, I'm curious. Let's see. How old is Harrison Ford? Harrison Ford is currently 77 years old. Now, think about it. Think about anybody you know in your life, parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, who's 77 right now. 77. We, especially the fan community, we still have this idea in our minds that our characters, especially Indiana Jones, is forever. He's going to be the same age. How does a 77-year-old man, even if they start shooting next year, and when I say old man, I don't mean old man. I mean a 77-year-old who's also a man, who's going to be 78 when they start shooting this movie. How do you make an Indiana Jones movie work with a 78-year-old protagonist? That's a hard thing to do. Now, again, I'd look to Ryan Coogler as Creed. That's how you put a young man, a new character, and you have him work with Stallone. That worked. But then I know they tried to do that with Shia LaBeouf, to very mixed results. But if you did something like that, maybe it could work, and then you have a spinoff. But I really believe that the character of Indiana Jones, I like your idea of doing young Indiana Jones. I mean, they could get away with doing something like that. But the Harrison Ford Indiana Jones, I give him one last hurrah, but it's tough. I think it's really, really difficult to get people to buy into that. I really do. And I don't know if that would work. But yeah, I could see doing a young Indiana. I like that. Two filmmakers came. That would be kind of neat. Bookend that. That could be neat. But by the way, you'd also have to have Philip Kaufman there. So it'd have to be three filmmakers. Director Philip Kaufman. My moderator sent me a letter. Jordy Lyons sent me a letter. Hey, Rob, a letter and a non-spoiler review on BBC's new series, War of the Worlds. Stated assault begins slowly, very slowly, after a meteorite lands in Surrey and an astronomer referred to as Ogilvy investigates alongside the two main characters. However, the narrative never seems to escalate because the episode continues to groan on. Would it be too much to ask someone to get vaporized with a heat ray? Then the aliens get away of their shells and start exterminating Earthlings with somewhat effectively. Barely shifting the story from 1897 to the early 20th century, the collective depiction of vastly superior alien know-how pitted against Edwardian weaponry is oddly humbling, with scenes of human cities that are torn to shreds and civilians randomly burst into flames, possessing a nightmare-like high quality. In reality, highly effective visuals abound, with common cutaways to insect life calling again to the immortal opening phrases, and a shot of a craft leaving Mars regularly, showing like a merciless inhuman eye because it attracts ever nearer. However, that is additionally a drama that positively has some issues to say. Smug British imperialism serves as the backdrop to the alien invasion, whereas the social mores of the time additionally present some gentle political commentary, which was not needed. Sure, modifications have been made to Wells' material that we were able to actually talk about them in the current day, and are positive to ask loads of dialogue after the primary episode, which is now aired. In fact, not everything is ideal. For each thrilling visible shot from director Craig Viverios, there's additionally an astonishing variety of intense close-ups of Eleanor Tomlinson's fearful face, her zoomed-in options turning up so unusually that it turns into a bit of a distraction, if not borderline crazy, as the primary hour continued. Typically, the episode's sense of tempo and peril saps a bit of. Notably, through the scenes, they just place a few barely bored-looking extras who gaze up into the sky at large CGI peril, and they aren't the least bit frightened. Generally, though, it's a stable and attention-grabbing adaptation. Different literary diversifications might themselves be trying on with envious eyes. Thanks, Rob, and live long and prosper. Well, Jordy, as you know, I'm very interested to see this, so I can't wait to see this adaptation. For those of you who don't know, the BBC has done a period-accurate adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, which originally took place in Victorian England. And for people who don't know, the original War of the Worlds was my first favorite movie when I was 5 years old. It was the greatest thing I had ever seen. Mananin, I love that name, but I can't spell it right. Let me try this again. Manninen. Mannion. It's Mannion, right? Or Manninen. It's killing me. But I love the name Jer. Anyway, thank you for supporting the channel. I love that. And what you have to say here is also your positivity and your channel community are amazing. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. You know, and it's truly a global community. That's what I love about it. There's people from all over the world here. You know, I think about when I first met people like Vesna and Joseph. You know, Vesna was here from the beginning, and people like Willow Yang who've stuck with it. And it's great. And then you've got Timbula the spider monkey down in Australia, and there's people from all over the world. It's great. So I love this community. Willow Yang says, why are so many Starfleet admirals jerks, mentally unstable, or corrupt? They really need to re-examine their screening processes. You know, I've thought a lot about that, Willow, and I tend to believe it's because the infinitude of the final frontier can crush a man's ego. You know, if you've never seen, and I think that's what happens to Starfleet admirals. That's why so many of them, and so many Starfleet captains go a little wackadoo. You know, Charlton Heston's character, Taylor, was talking about that it crushes a man's ego. Space, the infinitude, crushes a man's ego. He says that at the beginning of Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes. But yeah, it is a Star Trek trope I always thought was kind of strange. But I don't know. I think it is. By the way, I keep thinking about this Swedish movie, Anaria. If you guys haven't seen it, it's either on Amazon now or Hulu. Anaria, man, you got to watch this movie because or maybe you shouldn't. If you are prone to depression, or if you're on the edge and you tend to get depressed easily, I would not recommend watching this movie, Anaria. I know I talked about it a while ago, but I recently watched it. And it's based on a Swedish epic poem, or I don't know if the original poem is an epic poem. I think it is. And I found out it's like the second adaptation. But so Anaria is basically about this giant space cruise ship, And they've made the happy version with Dr. House running it. But no, there's another show coming out that reminded me of Inaria. So Inaria is this space cruise ship that's making a jaunt from Earth, which is being consumed by global warming, and things are bad on the Earth. But it's like this gigantic space cruise ship with thousands of people on it that's just going to take a 3-week trip to Mars. And it has a problem, and it goes off course. And it heads straight out into the infinitude of the cosmos. And let me just tell you, I don't want to take away the joys of discovering what happens, but it was a very low-key movie, but I loved it. But basically, it is one of the most depressing and soul-crushing movies you'll ever see. And not in a way, it's not like, say, you're watching Schindler's List or something. It's not depressing like that. But when you really it's depressing because you're really coming to grips with what does it mean? What does life mean? And what does the infinitude of the cosmos mean? And what do we mean in the vastness of space? I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I need to buy it on Blu-ray. But yeah, I think that's why Willow, they all went crazy. Mustache Review says, theory, Linda Carter will show up in Crisis and play the Kingdom Come version of Wonder Woman with Conroy and Ralph. Oh, I like that theory. I love the idea that Linda Carter and Kevin Conroy and Brandon Routh will be, because Wonder Woman and Bruce will be older than Superman because he would come to Earth. I think that's a great idea. What a great idea that is. I hope that happens. I love that idea that Linda Carter, Kevin Conroy, and Brandon Routh are the Kingdom Come versions of, well, Conroy's clearly wearing something, so I love that idea. Also, thoughts on the Stargirl CW news. Oh, was there Stargirl CW news? I haven't been paying attention. I've been working. I don't know what that is. Let me look. Let's see. Stargirl CW. Now we know when. Oh, this is from 2 days ago. You know what? I didn't see this, although I really like Stargirl. Oh, it's on the CW. Well, there you go. I think that's great. Bring on Stargirl. Stargirl is going to be on the CW. I think, look, they're going to phase out the DC universe because it'll all move over to HBO Max eventually. So that makes sense to me. I think it's great. Bring her on. More of those characters, please. Whether it's the Justice Society, whether it's Infinity Incorporated, I love them all. Bring them in. So that's very exciting. I didn't know that. This one comes from Jason DeWolf. Hey, Rob, I was going to just post this on YouTube after watching a video of yours, but I thought I may as well send this in as a letter. I just got done rewatching the prequel trilogy last night as I'm going through all the movies in the timeline up to Jedi before delving into The Mandalorian. In regards to the quality of these movies, there is no doubt that there are some great Star Wars to them, and many great parts, becoming increasingly more consistent as we reach Revenge of the Sith. Even the weaker points of it is pretty darn good movie, and it has some real feels to it. I even think Hayden did a pretty good job in an often overlooked aspect of his spotty performance. I can see what he was partly going on with his acting, that some don't like. There was a real conscious attempt to emulate the stoic and factual left-brain personality that Darth Vader had, and put that in a continuity with Anakin, which makes sense from that point of view, but with questionable results. What do you think, Rob? Is there a parallel with Hayden's wooden acting with that of Darth Vader's personality? And if so, was it the right choice from a story point? Could another actor have been more able to pull it off, or should they have made his personality more appealing? It had to be a hard line to walk to say, hey, this is the most feared Force user in the universe, but also the love of someone's life, a good friend, and a Jedi. I suspect that if Lucas would have taken on the role that he did on The Empire Strikes Back and we had a better director, it would have translated better. Nice to hear it's so warm in Southern California. We've already had like 6 inches of snow here in Ontario before the middle of November. Unbelievable what happened to global warming. Well, it's here in California. But, I want to thank you for writing that. And look, I want to thank you, Jason. But I think the real problem that I have with the prequel trilogy is I don't believe there's no verisimilitude in the people. The characters, they're so stilted George Lucas has sort of he'd lost touch with hanging out with people. He'd forgotten what real people sound like. And I think that's the real problem is the direction and the writing of the characters. And none of the storytelling flows with none of it feels organic or real. None of the scenes do. And I think it was a function of a lot of things. I think the way they filmed that, using predominantly green screen, was a big factor. And I think also that George isn't great with actors either. And it's all very stilted, and the writing is not good. But there's a lot of really interesting Star Wars stuff in it. And I think as I'm removed from time, there's something that's weird to me that's happened with the prequel trilogy. When it was new Star Wars, and we're looking at new Star Wars, and we're all excited about it. And it was really lacking for a number of reasons. But now, like when I was watching it on Disney Plus, by the way, the movies look damn good on Disney Plus. When I was watching with Elizabeth on her rewatch, I found myself looking at these movies as if they really were from a long time ago. Like I was watching movies from, say, the 50s. I don't know why. And I found myself really enjoying them. Like I've always hated the prequel trilogy. I mean, Revenge of the Sith was better, but there are certain scenes that I really like. Like I like watching the big battle at the end of Attack of the Clones on Geonosis. I like all of that. I don't know why people don't. Maybe it just tickles my inner child or whatever. But watching them now, and if you look upon them as like this weird period piece, like I'm watching as if I was watching real science fiction movies that were made in the 50s. And then Star Wars, to me, it's like, yes, this is it's a science fiction movie from the 70s. The verisimilitude there, and it's strange. So I go back and watch those movies now, and I like them a lot more. I think they're much better, and they're a lot of fun, I think, which surprised me. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can say what Anakin, what Hayden Christensen was trying to do. So I just don't think it's cast well. I don't. Hayden Christensen looked the part, but he's not being directed well enough. That I don't believe that the character that Hayden Christensen's playing, he's too whiny. He's not adult enough. He's not conflicted enough. It's just not well written enough to make me believe Vader's fall from grace. And I think that's one of the big problems with the prequel trilogy is the stilted performances and the writing do it no favors. But collectively, they're better than I thought. You know, going back again, maybe I'm more forgiving as I get older. Or maybe I am not. Maybe I'm not as forgiving. I'm not as forgiving. I don't know. But I do like them better than I used to. I used to just not be able to sit through those movies at all. Mukbang Reviews is here. Hello. The beginning of your show about the value of music made me think of Prince. His last thoughts relative to the final book were about the value and ownership of creative work. You know what? I like the book a lot. I'm actually going through it a second time. Prince, it's kind of his memoirs, but it's not really his memoirs, but stuff he wrote down. But yes, he was very, very concerned throughout his life about Prince was very concerned. One of my favorite, if not my favorite, rock and roll performer of all time. I'm a huge Prince fan. And he was very concerned with who owned his music, because the music business was never favorable for artists. And when Prince was coming up, he was with Warner Brothers for a long time and made them a lot of money. And there was a lot of money that he missed out on. And then he made it a crusade that he really, for the latter half of his career, post Purple Rain, post Around the World in a Day, post Parade and Sign of the Times, going into the late 80s and certainly the 90s, he fought for his rights. And that was a big thing. It was a big thing with him. And I respect the hell out of him for it. And he was right. And I would recommend the book. You should, if you're a Prince fan, you should get the book. But it's not like he wrote this big book about his life. There's a little section that he wrote, but it's still really interesting. And I haven't got that new 1999 set, but man, do I want that. Woohoo. Yeah, that's some good stuff. I mean, we're in a Prince Renaissance now. There's a lot of stuff coming out. that he wrote. And if you're a Prince fan, and I'm a diehard Prince fan, you should definitely check it out. Stubble McShave says, everything is great about the prequels except the human interactions. You know, I have to say, I agree with you. I really do. I think that the human interactions are not good at all. And, you know, they even did things, you look at the technology and you go back and you look, they would cut apart takes and put things together. And no one's words. There's only a line or two here and there that even feel authentic, that human beings even said them for real, which is kind of disappointing. And that's what I think is the real problem with those movies, is they definitely have a problem with the human interaction. I don't believe them at all. So this one comes from Roberto Suarez, writes in and says, Dear Rob, your recent discussion in John Campia's show about upcoming Marvel movies brought up a question. Do you think the build-up to a new X-Men movie could be approached in a similar way to the first Avengers film? What I mean is, could several individual solo films about mutants be released leading up to a Team X-Men movie? It seems like an approach Feige might consider, giving us success with the Avengers. I actually think that's a great idea. I think that is absolutely what they're going to have to do, is make the MCU Avengers, or the MCU X-Men, which has to be different than the X-Men that we've seen. And, you know, they did that with the first, Bryan Singer's first X-Men from 2000, really is Wolverine's story. We meet Wolverine, we're introduced to the X-Men through Wolverine, and we learn who they are through the characters of Wolverine and his interactions with the rest of the cast. And John suggested doing their version of Wolverine already. I think, look, I don't know if that would be the best idea, because again, you're fighting against Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine, which lasted almost 2 decades. So I think that's tough. But introducing, look, I would introduce Storm in the next Black Panther. In the comics, they've been married before, but I would introduce the MCU version of Storm in Wakanda. Why not? And I think that you definitely could do. I thought the way they introduced Black Panther in Civil War and then spun him off into his own movie was great. Who didn't watch Civil War and love T'Challa? I mean, everyone loved him, because he was done really, really well. And I think that's probably how they are. And then if you spun off a movie, if you did a Storm film, like, I think the character of Storm is ripe for a single movie. Absolutely. 100%. So, yeah, I absolutely think that's a great idea. A great idea. And I think they really should do that. This letter comes from Mark Chure. Mark is an old school member of this, Post-Geek Singularity. He has also identified himself on numerous occasions as a toxic fan. I, however, have not found him to be that way. Dear Rob, I wanted to write a letter concerning Hollywood and politics. Uh-oh. I'm not just talking about the identity politics of cancel culture, but the vocal takedown of the president by the Hollywood community. Understand, as a conservative, this president isn't my favorite. He has done things I like, and he has done things I thought were foolish. In the last election, I didn't vote for either. That said, about half the nation does like the guy and voted for him. Conservatives are capitalists. But after 3 years of prominent members of Hollywood being very vocal to the point of calling out and insulting people who voted for him, these are tactics adopted from cancel culture. It gets to the point where you ask, why should I support a person or a project after being called a white nationalist, misogynist, racist, or bigot from some idiot who doesn't know me but has the balls to ask for my cash? I think it's not completely cut and dried. I look at Motherless Brooklyn and Dr. Sleep, and I think they suffered from bad marketing, but honestly, I don't know. That said, I know exactly why the films Terminator Dark Fate and Charlie's Angels died. Look no further than the interviews and social media of those involved. When your push for girl power moves to man bashing, you are burning down your own house. Celebrities seem to feel, since they have a platform, that they should use it. We have freedom of speech, but we don't have freedom from repercussions. As someone wanting to maximize the financial potential of a film project, maybe, just maybe, you are better off shutting your mouth and not alienating half your audience. I saw politics majorly hurt the gaming industry and cripple the comic book industry. I think we are reaching a point where normies, not trapped in the online world, adopting a similar policy. Again, as with all things political, I don't expect anyone to agree with me. But just think, Mark C. Well, this is directly a political letter, but here's how I feel. I am no fan of President Trump. I think I just don't think he's qualified to be in the position that he was in. That said, he was elected. He won the electoral college vote, and there are a lot of Americans that really like him. And again, we're all Americans. And when somebody is elected president, I've always thought that whether I've voted for presidents, since I've voted for presidents, actually, more presidents that I didn't vote for were elected than I did vote for. And I think here's the thing. We have very difficult problems that we need to surmount. And the United States is a big country, and we have a lot of different people. And the people that live in cities have, say, different concerns than those people that work in the farm belts or work in rural areas. But we're all Americans. We all have the same Constitution. We all have the same Bill of Rights. And I do think that it's much more productive for the country to get together and rally behind a president, whether he was your president or not, to fix the major problems that we have. Now, I think that, yes, like Obama before him, the slings and arrows that have been coming the president's way have been problematic. And while I don't think President Trump, you can't say that there's a great economy happening, or at least the stock market is great, when you have trillions of dollars worth of debt being run up. You can't do both. But I do think it would be more productive if our country was dealing with the very real issues that we have to deal with. I feel that the United States, and this is the fault of both parties, and there are smart people on both sides, but we are not addressing the future that is rapidly bearing down on us. We're spending more time with this gotcha mentality, and I feel it's both sides. And I watched two different documentaries that everybody should watch. One is just look it up, documentary about AI. I think it was a Frontline documentary on AI. It's like a 2-hour documentary. And then there's another documentary about the city of, I want to say Shenzhou, the Chinese city of Shenzhou. And it's another 2-hour documentary. Watch those two documentaries together. And nothing made me feel more frustrated for the direction our country is going in, because there is a future out there that is being built, that is happening all around us. And every single day, we are being left behind. The nation, the United States is. And all of this political infighting, I mean, look, it's clear that Putin is laughing his ass off at us. And while I don't like seeing public land where we shouldn't be drilling anyway, I understand why fossil fuels, coal, all of these industries, they're over. And rather than build new industries, whether it's renewables or green tech or whatever you want to get into, we need to be looking at the future. We need to be figuring out how we're going to clean up the planet. We need to figure out more about things like sustainability and recyclability. We have a lot of difficult problems that we need to be addressing, and we should be creating brand new industries, and we're not. And I feel part of it is that this political infighting in our country is to blame. We have a lot more issues we should be dealing with rather than the impeachment of a president who gets himself into trouble because he hasn't staffed half of our own government. And I just think that, we're not doing anything for any Americans. And there's a lot of partisan issues. There's a lot of this let's go get those people that don't agree with us. We all need to band together. We all need to band together to solve our very difficult problems. People from both sides. This entrenched power base and what people are holding on to, I don't know, because we have a lot of things that we should be doing that we're not doing. And for whatever reason, I watched these two documentaries. I forget the name of them. I think I tweeted both of them out. Watch those documentaries, and you're like, why isn't our entire country mobilized to be dealing with the oncoming situation that we're all going to face with AI? And when you look at what's going on in these Chinese cities, I'm like, my God, I think it's Shenzhou. Am I thinking the name of the ship on Discovery? But it's incredible what they've done in this one city. It's amazing. Just watch this documentary. I'll find it and find the links. But yeah, I mean, I think, look, one thing I've discovered, even on our online community, I can go on a channel with Jeremy on Geeks and Gamers, and we can have a conversation and celebrate our love of fandom, and have a great conversation and move forward. That's what we need to learn to do across the board, because we are losing our status in the world. We are losing our status amongst one another. And it's something that everybody wants us to do. And why play into that? It's not good. Not good at all. I know that was a little bit more political than I normally delve into, and I wasn't prepared for that. But yes. Oh my God, I've been talking for a very long time. Mustack Review says, thoughts on Dean Cain as Superman and the 90s Flash. I like both. I like Lois and Clark, and I like the Flash. I thought they were both good. You know, it's funny. The Flash was a direct result of Batman's success, and I liked it. But again, it was before people really knew how to take the source material seriously. But I liked it. I thought it was good. And I did look what Lois and Clark was for a while. It was a lot of fun. It was certainly not the superhero show I wanted, but I enjoyed watching it. You know, it was good. I like Terry Hatcher. There's a reason why they made her a Bond girl, let me tell you. So I liked it. Sadhu's Screening Room says, great shirt. Oh, thank you. It's a Mondo shirt they made for a little while. Mondo did these Kubrick shirts, and I could not have these shirts. Sadhu Screen Room also says, and Knives Out is the funniest and twistiest movie of the year. Also, cancel culture makes me wary of thought crime from Orwell's 1984. You know, that's another thing. I as somebody who reads a lot of science fiction, which deals with a lot of out there ideas, I find it's very weird to me that we forget that there's a lot of diverse human beings on this planet with diverse experiences. And I'm constantly amazed at the direction that the direction people come at things from when you meet them. And I think cancel culture is it's very strange, and it's bizarre. It's a bizarre, like, I'm really glad that I am not in my 20s trying to date these days. I would just get in trouble. You know, I'd meet somebody, I'd go out on a first date, and I usually had pretty good first dates, to be honest. I don't think as a matter of fact, I don't think I ever had a bad date in my life, to be honest with you. But I can't imagine some of the shenanigans that I got up to when I was in my 20s would even fly. Like, there's things that you can't say or do, or it's weird. I don't know. I've always been somebody that's been outgoing, and I like talking to all different kinds of people, and it's weird. Like, this idea that that you would go after somebody because they believed something different from you. Now, it's one thing when by the way, if you haven't watched Sacha Baron Cohen's speech that he gave about Facebook, it's all over social media. Please watch it. It's like 24 minutes long. Please watch it. It's great. But yeah, I mean, I've always liked all kinds of people. So I've been listening to people who have diametrically opposed viewpoints to me my whole life, but I've never wanted to cancel them. You know, you listen to them and you're like, okay, they exist, they're here, and that's interesting. And now I need to understand, how do I interact with these people when they have different worldviews than I do? So my first inclination was to be like, well, how do I do that? And that's what I did. Listen, anyway, I'm like, I haven't even had lunch yet. I haven't even eaten anything. So listen, this is a long chat. I'm going to bring this chat to a close, ladies and gentlemen. I have a ton of letters I haven't got to. I still got 2 Willow Yang letters in my quiver that I have yet to fire off. But I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank Detective Jim. I want to thank my new moderators, Jordy Lyons and Louis Yu. I hope you're still having fun. And I want to thank, of course, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden for being here. And yeah, so I love my moderating staff. I love everything that you do. By the way, Rick Berg sends in another super chat and says, I invite you all to read Animal Farm. Yes, you should. George Orwell's Animal Farm. What a delightful book. By the way, Andy Serkis is supposed to make that movie for Netflix. So check that out. Mukbang Reviews says, I bought my first hot toy because of this channel, Black Panther. Paula, drag that out of me. By the way, how great is that Black Panther figure? I have it right up. I don't know if you can see it. He's leaning on the throne of Wakanda, and Shuri is sitting in the throne of Wakanda. That Black Panther figure is great. It comes with the lighting thing, and it has the light up. It doesn't light up, but it's got the way light reflects. It's so great. And the Chad Boseman head sculpt is great. That is an awesome figure. Well done, sir. I have many more that I want. Thanks for the addiction. It's a great addiction to have. I really enjoy it, and it's lots of fun. You know, the one thing about Hot Toys, and I said this, if you go back and you watch it on this channel, I did make for the, God, it seems like so long ago, but for the 100th episode of Collider Heroes, I made a video about my hot toy collection as it existed back then when I had my old office in the Axonar building, Axonar studio. And I filmed it. I shot it in like about 5 hours. I stayed up all night and did it. I was working and then we showed it. But you can see my hot toy collection at the time and how I had it arranged in my office. And I also explained why I love action figures and why I love Hot Toys figures. So I invite all of you to go check that out. But I'm glad you like Hot Toys figures, Mukbang Reviews. It is it's fun. But what they are for me is they represent their sort of a totem. I use them as totems of things I aspire to be as a storyteller, because they're all great characters, the actors, the writer directors, even the studio. Because I collect, basically Hot Toys are Marvel, DC, and Star Wars now. Now occasionally you'll get other figures, but they don't make that many because they don't sell as well. But the Marvel, the DC, and the Star Wars figures, and they're great. They're great. Sometimes their face sculpts aren't great, but for the most part, I love them, and I love putting them all together and putting them, making displays. It's just lots of fun. I'm glad you like Hot Toys figures. It's good to hear, because they are great, but they're damn expensive. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank my moderators. I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody for supporting this channel. Yeah, you can actually, I don't know, can you see? Oh no, T'Challa, you can see, yeah, Black Panther's right here. Here's the throne of Wakanda, and here's Shuri. And there's Marlon Brando as Jor-El. I don't know why they're that way. I got the Avengers on this side, though. And down below over there. But the whole display is going to change. It's all going to be lit up. You'll be able to see everything. So I want to thank you all for being here for this, the 282nd episode of Robservations, the show about something. You guys make it what it is, and I want to thank you very much for supporting the channel in all the ways that you do. I will be on the John Campea show tomorrow and back here, and I want to thank you again. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen, and if I haven't got to your letter, I will get to it, because I'm so behind on letters, but I've got more to read. Even as I said, I had like 25 to read today. I barely scratched the surface, but I will be back. And I want to thank you for all the support. As always, have a better day. Or I can't turn it off yet. There we go. Have a better day.